The fire crackled low between the rocks, sending sparks into the darkness like dying stars. Ronan Vale sat cross-legged beside it, hands resting easy on his knees, looking for all the world like a man enjoying an evening's rest. His hat was pulled low. His coat was dusty from 100 miles of hard country, and 5 armed men surrounded him in a half-circle, weapons drawn, eyes hungry with the promise of gold. Tarek Voss stood among them, rifle raised but trembling slightly in his grip. He was 34 years old and felt twice that. The lines around his eyes weren't from laughter. They were from watching his wife waste away one painful day at a time while he stood helpless beside her bed. He'd tracked game across 3 territories. He'd brought in rustlers and horse thieves without breaking a sweat. But tracking this man, this legend who sat so calm with death circling him, felt different, felt wrong. "You gonna sit there all night, Vale?" Silas Creed's voice cut through the stillness like a blade scraping bone. He was the leader of this little hunting party, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from old leather and bad intentions. "Were you planning to make this interesting?" Ronan didn't look up. He poked at the fire with a stick, watching embers rise and fade. "I'm comfortable," he said quietly. "You boys are the ones standing." To Tarek's left, a wiry man named Finch laughed, high and nervous. Finch had been talking about the bounty money since they left Casper Ridge 3 weeks ago. Talking about what he'd buy, where he'd go, how he'd never have to work another honest day in his miserable life. The man to Tarek's right was Garrett, broad-shouldered and silent, the kind who did his talking with fists and boots. Beyond him stood Moss, young and stupid, barely 20, with eyes that shone too bright in the firelight. And then there was Creed, who'd put this whole ugly thing together, $4,000. That's what the syndicates were paying for Ronan Vale, dead or alive, preferably dead. Tarek needed that money, every cent of it. Elena's medicine was running out, and the doctor in Silver Creek had made it clear that without steady treatment, she had maybe 2 months, 3 if she was lucky. Luck hadn't been visiting the Voss household much lately. "You know what I think?" Ronan said, still not looking at any of them. "I think you boys should walk away." Creed spat into the dirt. "That right?" "That's right." Ronan's voice stayed level, conversational even. "You walk away now, you go home. See your families. Wake up tomorrow." "We wake up poor," Finch said, his laugh dying in his throat. "You wake up breathing," Ronan replied. "Some folks would call that a win." Garrett shifted his weight, and Tarek saw the man's finger tighten on his trigger. This was going to happen. There was no talking their way out of it now. They'd come too far, spent too many days tracking Vale across the Badlands, lost too much sleep imagining what they'd do with their share of the bounty. "Last chance," Ronan said, and this time he did look up. His eyes caught the firelight, dark and steady. "Walk away." Creed raised his pistol. "We didn't come all this way to—" Tarek's world tilted. It happened in pieces, in fragments that his mind couldn't quite stitch together. Ronan's hand moved, not toward a weapon, just a small gesture, almost casual. And Finch suddenly swung his rifle toward Garrett, eyes gone wild with something that looked like terror, or greed, or both, at once. "He's selling us out," Finch screamed. "Garrett's got to deal with the syndicates. He's going to take the whole bounty." "What?" Garrett's face twisted in confusion, then rage. "You lying son of a—" "Easy," Creed barked, but his voice had lost its edge. Uncertainty had crept in. Tarek's rifle was still pointed at Ronan, but his attention had fractured. Was this a trick? Had Ronan somehow planted this poison between them? Or had it been there all along, festering beneath the surface while they rode together and shared meals and pretended they were anything other than desperate men chasing blood money? "I saw the telegram," Finch insisted, his voice cracking. "Back in Blackwater, Garrett was meeting with—" "There was no telegram," Garrett roared. "You're making this up because you want a bigger share." Moss, the young one, swung his pistol wildly between them. "Everybody just calm down." Nobody calmed down. Creed tried to regain control. "All of you shut your damn mouths and focus on—" But Ronan was already moving, not running, not diving for cover, just standing up, slow and deliberate, like a man who'd seen this play out a dozen times before and knew exactly how it ended. "Here's what's going to happen," Ronan said quietly, and somehow his voice carried over all of theirs. "One of you is going to shoot. Then the rest of you will shoot. And by the time the smoke clears, most of you will be dead. Maybe all of you. Not if we kill you first, Creed said, but there was a waver in his voice now. Ronan smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. You really think that's how this works? You think I sat here by this fire because I got careless? He glanced at each of them in turn. I sat here because I wanted you to find me. Because I wanted to see which one of you had enough sense left to walk away. Tarek's hands were sweating on the rifle stock. His heart hammered against his ribs. Elena's face flashed through his mind, pale, weak, trusting him to save her. You're bluffing, Finch said, but he was backing up, just a half step. Am I? Ronan's hand drifted toward his coat. Not fast, just a slow, inevitable movement. Tell you what, let's test it. Who wants to be first? The canyon held its breath. Tarek saw it all in fractured time, Creed's finger twitching on the trigger, Garrett turning his gun from Finch back toward Ronan, Moss's eyes going wide with the realization that this wasn't an adventure anymore. This was the moment where boys learned what blood actually looked like when it left a man's body. And Finch was still swinging his rifle between Garrett and Ronan, paranoia eating him alive. He's right, Tarek heard himself say. This is wrong. Every eye turned toward him. What did you say? Creed's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. Tarek's mouth was dry. The words had come out without permission, dragged up from somewhere deep and honest that he'd buried years ago. I said this is wrong. Look at us. We're about to kill each other over money we haven't even earned yet. Then earn it, Creed snapped. Shoot him. Tarek's rifle didn't move. Shoot him, Voss, or I swear to... Or what? Tarek asked quietly. You'll shoot me? Add my body to the pile? How's that help you collect the bounty? Ronan watched this exchange with an expression that might have been respect, might have been amusement, hard to tell in the firelight. Your wife's dying, Creed said, and each word was a calculated strike. You walk away from this, she dies poor, is that what you want? The truth of it hit Tarek like a physical blow. Elena. The reason he'd said yes to this insanity in the first place, the reason he'd left their small cabin on the edge of nowhere and ridden into this cursed canyon with men he didn't trust to hunt a man he'd never met. If I shoot an unarmed man for money, Tarek said slowly, I'm not the man she married. I'm not the man worth saving. He's not unarmed, Garrett growled. Look at him. They all looked. Ronan's coat had fallen open slightly, revealing a pistol at his hip. Just one. No rifle. No hidden arsenal. Just a single weapon against 5 armed men. Those are bad odds, Moss whispered. For who? Ronan asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. Creed made his decision. His gun came up fast, aimed square at Ronan's chest. This ends now! Everything happened at once. Ronan's hand moved, not toward his gun, but into his coat. Something small and metallic glinted in the firelight. Creed fired. The bullet whined past Ronan's head as he ducked left, and whatever he'd grabbed from his coat went flying toward Garrett. It was a deputy's badge, old and tarnished, but unmistakable. Garrett caught it reflexively, stared at it in confusion, and that moment of distraction cost him everything. Finch, seeing the badge, seeing betrayal confirmed in his paranoid mind, pulled his trigger. The shot took Garrett in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fired back, wild, and his bullet caught Moss in the leg. The young man went down screaming. Creed was already firing again, but Ronan had moved, rolled behind a boulder with speed that shouldn't have been possible for a man his age. Return fire came from the darkness, precise, measured shots that kicked up dirt at Creed's feet and sent him diving for cover. Tarek stood frozen in the chaos. Finch was still firing at where Garrett had been, but Garrett had crawled behind the fire, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Moss was on the ground, crying, begging for someone to help him. And Creed was screaming orders that nobody was following because everyone was too busy trying not to die. A hand grabbed Tarek's arm. He spun, rifle coming up, and found himself staring into Ronan's face. The man had circled around somehow, moved through the shadows like a ghost, and now stood close enough that Tarek could see the gray in his stubble, the old scars on his knuckles, the absolute lack of fear in his eyes. You got a choice to make, Ronan said quietly. The gunfire continued behind them, but here in this small pocket of darkness, it was just the two of them. You can keep standing there, waiting to see who wins this mess, Or you can do something about it. I don't, Tarek's voice cracked. I don't know what to do. Yes, you do. Ronan's grip tightened. You knew what to do the second you said this was wrong. Now follow through. He released Tarek's arm and melted back into the shadows. Tarek stood there, rifle in hand, while the canyon tore itself apart with violence and greed and fear. He thought about Elena, about the medicine she needed, about the life they'd built together out of nothing but hard work and stubborn hope. He thought about what kind of man brought that money home, soaked in dishonor. Finch appeared around the boulder, reloading frantically, eyes manic. He saw Tarek and something like relief crossed his face. Voss, help me corner him. If we... Tarek shot him, not to kill. The bullet took Finch in the thigh, dropping him hard. The man's scream cut through the night, and suddenly the canyon went quiet. The gunfire stopped. Everyone froze. Tarek stepped into the firelight, rifle steady now, pointed at Creed. It's over, Tarek said. Creed stared at him from behind his cover, face twisted with fury and disbelief. You just shot one of us. Yeah. Tarek's voice didn't shake anymore. I did. You're dead, Creed hissed. You know that? You're a dead man. I'll make sure of it. Maybe, Tarek shrugged. But I'll die clean. Ronan stepped back into the light, pistol drawn but pointed at the ground. He looked at Tarek for a long moment, then nodded once. Just a small dip of his head, but it carried weight. Anybody else want to die tonight? Ronan asked the canyon at large. Garrett was still clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Moss was curled around his leg wound, sobbing quietly. Finch had passed out from pain or shock or both. And Creed stood up slowly, pistol still in hand. This ain't over, Vale, he said. It is for tonight, Ronan replied. For a moment, Tarek thought Creed might actually try it, might actually raise that gun and go for one last desperate shot. But something in Ronan's stance, in the casual way he held his weapon, in the absolute certainty of his words, broke through Creed's rage. The older man spat blood into the dirt, holstered his gun, and walked away into the darkness. Just like that. No final threat, no last curse. He simply left. Garrett struggled to his feet, pressing one hand against his wound, and stumbled after Creed without a word. That left Moss, still whimpering on the ground, and Finch unconscious and bleeding. They need a doctor, Tarek said. Ronan was already moving, kneeling beside Moss with surprising gentleness. Bullet went through clean. He'll live. He glanced at Finch. That one too, if we stop the bleeding. Together, they worked in silence. Tarek fetched bandages from his saddlebag. Ronan cleaned and wrapped wounds with practiced efficiency. Moss had stopped crying, watching them with wide, confused eyes. Why are you helping us? The young man whispered. Ronan didn't look up from his work. Because you're young and stupid, not evil. There's a difference. When both wounded men were stable, Ronan stood and walked back to his fire. It had burned low during the chaos, just embers now. He fed it fresh wood, and flames rose again. Tarek found himself sitting across from the man he'd been sent to kill, watching firelight play across a face that had launched 1,000 wanted posters. You're not what I expected, Tarek said finally. Ronan smiled slightly. Never am. The badge you threw. Was Garrett really... No. Ronan poked at the fire. That was just an old piece of tin I picked up in some ghost town. But Finch was already suspicious of everybody. Didn't take much to light that particular fuse. You played us. I showed you what you already were, Ronan corrected. 5 strangers who didn't trust each other, chasing money they were never going to share fairly. I just accelerated the timeline. Tarek absorbed that. Why did you let me catch you? Who says you caught me? You were sitting here, waiting. Yeah. Ronan met his eyes across the flames. I was. Why? The outlaw was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire like he might find answers there. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of too many years and too many roads. Because I'm tired of running from men who don't know why they're chasing me. Because the people who put that bounty on my head, they're the ones who should be in cages, not me. And because... He paused. Because maybe I wanted to see if there was anyone left out here with the spine to choose right over easy. I shot a man tonight. You stopped a massacre, Ronan countered. Finch would have killed Garrett. Garrett would have killed Creed. Moss would have died in the crossfire. And you, he shook his head, you would have gone home rich and hollow. Now I go home with nothing. Nothing but yourself. Ronan pulled something from his coat, a small leather pouch. He tossed it across the fire. It landed in the dirt at Tarek's feet with a heavy clink of coins. And that, Tarek stared at the pouch. What is this? $300. It's what I've got on me. Not enough for a fortune, but enough for medicine. Enough to buy your wife some time. I can't. You can. Ronan's voice went hard. You made a choice tonight that cost you everything you came for. Don't insult us both by pretending you don't need help. Tarek picked up the pouch with shaking hands. The weight of it felt like redemption and shame mixed together. Why are you doing this? Because tomorrow I'm riding into Black Hollow, Ronan said quietly. And there's a decent chance I won't ride back out. If that happens, I'd like to know I did one good thing before the end. What's in Black Hollow? The men who made you desperate enough to hunt me. Ronan stood, dusting off his coat. The ones who own the land, the water, the banks. The ones who put bounties on people like me because we're bad for business. He looked at Tarek. The ones who made your wife's medicine so expensive you had to become someone you're not just to afford it. The truth of those words settled into Tarek's chest like a stone. There's a doctor in San Rafael, Ronan continued. Name's Abilene Hart. Tell her I sent you. She'll treat your wife, and she won't ask for more than you can pay. He scribbled something on a scrap of paper and handed it over. That's her address. Tarek took the paper, mind reeling. I don't understand. You're giving me money, sending me to a doctor, and then you're riding into a town that might kill you. Why? Ronan's smile was sad and old. Because somebody has to. He turned toward his horse, a gray gelding that had been standing quiet in the shadows throughout all the violence. Wait, Tarek called out. What do I tell people? About tonight? Ronan swung into the saddle with easy grace. Tell them the truth, that Ronan Vale is a dangerous man who shouldn't be hunted by amateurs. He gathered the reins. Tell them he's heading to Black Hollow to settle some debts. He paused. And tell them that when the reckoning comes, they'd better have chosen the right side. Then he was gone, riding into the darkness like he'd been swallowed by it. Tarek sat by the dying fire with $300 in his lap and two wounded men groaning nearby. Behind him, the canyon walls rose up like the bones of some ancient, sleeping thing. And ahead of him, dawn was coming, slow and inevitable and unforgiving. He thought about Elena, waiting for him in their cabin. Thought about the life they'd built. Thought about the man he'd been when he left and the man he was becoming now, sitting in the dust with blood on his conscience and hope in his hands. Moss spoke up weakly from his bedroll. What now? Tarek looked at the kid. Really looked at him. Barely old enough to shave, lying there with a bullet hole in his leg because he'd been stupid enough to chase legends with men who didn't care if he lived or died. Now we go home, Tarek said quietly, and we try to be better than we were yesterday. What about the bounty? There is no bounty. Tarek stood, pocketing the money. Not for us. Not anymore. He spent the next hour tending the wounded, making sure they'd live long enough to regret their choices. Finch woke up cursing and threatening, but shut up quick when Tarek reminded him that he'd been left alive as an act of mercy, and mercy could be rescinded. By the time the sun cracked the horizon, Tarek had the wounded men loaded on horses, ready for the long ride back to civilization. Creed and Garrett were long gone, probably halfway to the nearest town, spinning stories about how they'd barely escaped the notorious Ronan Vale. Let them talk, Tarek thought. Let them tell their lies. He knew the truth. The ride back was quiet. Moss drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling about his mother. Finch stayed silent, lost in whatever dark thoughts occupied a man who'd shot his partner over imagined betrayal. And Tarek rode with his eyes on the horizon, thinking about the strange outlaw who'd given him more than money. Who'd given him a choice, and then honored that choice with trust. It took 4 days to reach Silver Creek. Tarek left Moss and Finch at the doctor's office with enough coins to cover their treatment and a warning to stay the hell away from bounty hunting. Neither man argued. Then he rode hard for San Rafael. Dr. Abilene Hart turned out to be a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and hands that moved with absolute confidence. She read Ronan's note without comment, examined Elena without judgment, and laid out a treatment plan that would take months but might save her life. "Your husband got lucky," she told Elena. "Not many people have friends like Ronan Vale." Elena looked at Tarek with questions in her eyes, but she was too weak to ask them. He held her hand and promised to explain everything later. The medicine started that night. Tarek stayed in San Rafael for 2 weeks, sleeping on Dr. Hart's floor, working odd jobs to pay for room and board. Elena's color improved slowly, her breathing steadied. The fever that had been burning her alive finally broke on the 9th day, and she woke up clear-eyed and hungry for the first time in months. "Tell me what happened," she whispered. So he did. He told her about the canyon, the bounty, the moment he chose honor over money. He told her about Ronan Vale, not the legend, but the man who'd sat across a fire and offered him a way back to himself. Elena cried when he finished, not from sadness, from relief. "I thought I'd lost you," she said. "Not to death, to whatever darkness you were riding toward. You almost did. But you came back." "Yeah." He kissed her forehead. "I came back." On the 15th day, Dr. Hart declared Elena stable enough to travel. Tarek paid what he could, promised to send more when he was able, and started the journey home. They arrived at their cabin on a cold morning when frost still clung to the grass. The place looked smaller than Tarek remembered, more fragile, like a strong wind might blow it away. But it was theirs, built with their own hands, filled with their own memories. Elena stood in the doorway, breathing deep, and smiled. "Home," she said simply. "Home," Tarek agreed. That night, lying in their own bed for the first time in weeks, Elena asked him one more question. "Do you think he's still alive, Ronan?" Tarek stared at the ceiling, thinking about Black Hollow, about the men who controlled towns and lives and futures, thinking about one man riding toward all of that with nothing but conviction and a worn pistol. "I don't know," he admitted, but somewhere deep in his chest, in a place that didn't deal in logic or odds, he hoped. Because if men like Ronan Vale could still walk the earth, could still stand against the machine that ground people down and called it progress, then maybe there was hope for all of them. The frontier wind howled outside their cabin walls, carrying secrets and dust from 100 miles away. Tarek listened to it, listened to Elena's breathing beside him, and felt something settle in his soul. He'd made his choice in that canyon. Now he had to live with it, and somehow, impossibly, that felt exactly right. Miles away in a town called Black Hollow, where the streets ran with desperation and the saloons served watered-down hope, a man in a dusty coat walked through the front door of the Territorial Land Office. He didn't knock, didn't announce himself, just walked in like he owned the place. The clerk looked up, started to offer the standard greeting, and froze when he saw who stood before him. "I'm here to see Mr. Caldwell," Ronan Vale said quietly. He's not." "Yes, he is." Ronan smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made smart men reach for weapons and smarter men reach for the door. "Tell him I'm calling in some debts." The clerk ran, and in the silent office, surrounded by maps of stolen land and ledgers of ruined lives, Ronan Vale waited for the reckoning to begin. The clerk didn't come back. Smart man. Ronan stood in the center of the Territorial Land Office, taking in the details with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to read rooms the way most men read newspapers. Maps covered every wall, not the kind settlers used to find their way, but the kind that carved up the frontier into neat parcels of profit. Red lines marked boundaries. Blue pins indicated water rights. And scattered across those maps like a disease were small brass plates engraved with a single name, Caldwell Holdings. The air smelled of old paper and newer greed. Footsteps echoed from the back hallway, slow, deliberate, accompanied by the tap of an expensive walking stick against hardwood. The door opened, and Marcus Caldwell entered his own office like a king surveying a throne room he'd grown bored with. He was 60, maybe older, with silver hair swept back from a face that had once been handsome before cruelty settled into the corners. His suit probably cost more than most families earned in a year. Diamond cufflinks caught the afternoon light streaming through the window. Everything about him screamed money, and the kind of power that came from having enough of it to make laws bend. He looked at Ronan the way a man might look at mud tracked onto an expensive carpet. "Mr. Vale," Caldwell said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "I was wondering when you'd finally work up the courage to visit." "Wasn't about courage," Ronan replied. "Was about timing." Caldwell moved to his desk, set down his walking stick with deliberate care, and lowered himself into a leather chair that probably cost more than a good horse. He didn't offer Ronan a seat, didn't offer anything except a thin smile that held no warmth whatsoever. "And what makes now the right time?" "You sent 5 men to kill me 2 weeks ago," Ronan said flatly. "Figured I should return the courtesy." "Kill you?" Caldwell's eyebrows rose in practiced surprise. "My dear man, I simply posted a legal bounty for your apprehension. What those enterprising individuals chose to do with that information is hardly my responsibility." "Legal." Ronan tasted the word like it was poison. That's an interesting way to describe putting a price on a man's head. "You're wanted for crimes against property and commerce throughout 3 territories, Caldwell said, gesturing vaguely toward a filing cabinet. "I have the documentation if you'd like to review it. Arson, vandalism, destruction of valuable infrastructure. I burned down empty warehouses you were using to fix grain prices," Ronan interrupted. "I tore up rail lines you built through land that wasn't yours. And that valuable infrastructure. Those were the water dams you put up to strangle out farmers who wouldn't sell." Caldwell's smile never wavered. Perspective is such a malleable thing, isn't it? You see a righteous crusade. I see criminal destruction of private property. And the families you ruined? The ones who lost everything because you bought up their debts and foreclosed on Christmas morning? What do you see there? Business. The word came out cold and final. Nothing personal, Mr. Vale. Simply the natural order of commerce. The weak fail. The strong prosper. It's been that way since the first man traded a stone for a stick. Ronan moved closer to the desk. Not threatening, not yet, just closing distance. "Here's what I see. I see a man who's built an empire on breaking people, who hides behind lawyers and deeds and bounty hunters while he bleeds this territory dry, and I see that empire starting to crack." For the first time, something flickered in Caldwell's eyes. Not fear. Men like him had insulated themselves from fear years ago, but annoyance. Like a landowner noticing a fence post had rotted. "You've been a nuisance," Caldwell admitted. "I won't pretend otherwise, but nuisances can be eliminated. Professionally, efficiently." He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a folder. "I know about the incident at Red Mesa Canyon. I know you turned my hunters against each other. Clever work. But it changes nothing. Doesn't it?" "Not in the slightest." Caldwell opened the folder, revealing what looked like legal documents. "While you were playing games in the desert, I finalized the acquisition of the entire San Royale Valley, 63 homesteads, all now under Caldwell Holdings. Their occupants have 30 days to vacate or face forcible removal." The words hit Ronan like fists. San Royale Valley. He knew it. Good land, good people, families who'd broken their backs turning scrub into farmland. And now Caldwell had bought the ground out from under them. "How?" Ronan asked quietly. "The usual way. They took loans they couldn't repay. I bought those loans from banks I own. The rest is simply paperwork." Caldwell closed the folder with a soft snap. "By the end of summer, San Royale will be leased to the Continental Cattle Corporation at rates that will make my investors very happy." "And the families?" Caldwell shrugged. "Not my concern. They'll find work elsewhere, move on, adapt. That's what people do. Or they'll starve. That's what people do when you take everything they've built." "Then they should have built something more sustainable." Caldwell leaned back in his chair, studying Ronan with clinical interest. "You look troubled, Mr. Vale. Did you come here expecting to frighten me? To make some dramatic speech about justice and morality?" "No," Ronan said. "I came here to give you the same chance I gave those bounty hunters." "And what chance is that?" "Walk away. Sell your holdings to the families who actually work the land. Dissolve this empire you've built on suffering. Do it now. Do it quietly, and I'll let you leave this territory with your life." Caldwell laughed. It was a genuine sound, full of real amusement, and somehow that made it worse than contempt would have been. "My dear Mr. Vale, you're standing in my office, in my town, surrounded by my influence, making threats you have no power to enforce. Do you have any idea how many men I could have outside that door in minutes? How many lawmen, hired guns, loyal employees who would happily put a bullet in you for a week's wages? Probably a lot, Ronan admitted. Then perhaps you should reconsider your position. Or perhaps you should reconsider yours. Ronan placed both hands on the desk, leaning forward just enough to make Caldwell's composure crack at the edges. You think you're untouchable because you've bought the law and the banks and the politicians. But I've seen empires like yours before. They all look solid until someone finds the right pressure point. Then they collapse so fast it's almost funny. And you believe you found that pressure point? I know I have. Caldwell's smile thinned. Then enlighten me. Ronan straightened up, putting distance between them again. The Continental Cattle Corporation deal, the one you just mentioned. It's contingent on you delivering clear titles to the San Royale land by August 1st, isn't it? Something changed in Caldwell's expression. Just a flicker, barely visible, but Ronan caught it. How could you possibly— I talk to people, Ronan said simply. People you've stepped on. People who work in your offices and hear things. People who are tired of watching you win. He moved toward the maps on the wall, studying them like a general surveying a battlefield. And what I learned is that if those titles aren't clear, if there are legal challenges, disputes over ownership, questions about the validity of those loans, the cattle corporation walks away. And if they walk away, your investors panic. And if your investors panic, you're bluffing. But Caldwell's voice had lost some of its smoothness. Am I? Ronan traced a finger along the red lines marking San Royale Valley. Because I've also learned that you mortgaged most of your other holdings to finance this deal. Leveraged everything on one big play. Very bold. Very risky. He glanced back at Caldwell. Very stupid. The older man stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You have no legal standing to challenge those titles. No authority. No credibility in any court that matters. No, Ronan agreed. But I know 63 families who do. And I know a lawyer in Santa Fe who specializes in debt contract disputes. And I know a territorial judge who owes me a favor big enough that he'll at least hear the case. Caldwell's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Any delays in the transfer will be temporary. My attorneys will crush whatever pathetic legal challenge you scrape together. Probably. But it won't be done by August 1st. And that's all I need. Ronan moved toward the door, then paused. You wanted to know why now was the right time? Because I just spent 2 weeks making sure all the pieces were in place. The families in San Royale know what's coming. The lawyer's already drafting the challenges. And come Monday morning, your perfect little deal starts falling apart. I'll have you killed, Caldwell said quietly. Tonight, before you leave this building, if necessary. Ronan turned to face him fully. Maybe. But I've already sent copies of everything I know to 3 different newspapers. If something happens to me, they print it all. And once people start looking closely at how you built this empire, really looking, with lawyers and journalists and angry farmers paying attention, how long do you think it stands? The 2 men stared at each other across the office. Outside, Black Hollow went about its business, unaware that inside this room, a war was being declared with words instead of bullets. This isn't over, Caldwell said finally. No, Ronan agreed. It's just starting. He walked out, past the empty clerk's desk, into the late afternoon sun that turned the dusty streets of Black Hollow into rivers of gold. He made it 3 blocks before the first tail picked him up, a heavy man in a brown coat trying too hard to look casual. Another block, and there were 2 more, spreading out to cover the angles. Ronan kept walking, letting them think they were being clever. Black Hollow had the look of a town that had given up on its own future. The buildings were maintained just enough to stay standing, but no one had bothered with paint or pride in years. The saloon signs hung crooked. The boardwalks had gaps that could break an ankle. And everywhere, on every corner, were men with hard eyes and harder hands, Caldwell's people, keeping order through the simple threat of violence. Ronan had seen a dozen towns like this, places where one man's wealth had sucked all the life out of everything around it, leaving behind a husk that looked like civilization but felt like a prison. He ducked into the Silver Dollar Saloon, a decrepit establishment that smelled of old beer and older regrets. The bartender looked up, recognized him. Everyone in Black Hollow knew his face by now and quickly found somewhere else to be. The 3 tails entered 30 seconds later, spreading out to cover the exits. Ronan sat at a corner table with his back to the wall and waited. They didn't make him wait long. The heavy man in the brown coat approached first, trying for intimidating and landing somewhere around nervous. Mr. Caldwell would like you to reconsider your position. I heard him the first time, Ronan said. He's prepared to be generous. $5,000 to leave the territory and forget everything you think you know. That's insulting. 10,000 then. Not about the money. Ronan took a sip of the whiskey he'd ordered. It was terrible. It's about the number being so low it proves he's scared. Browncoat's face tightened. Mr. Caldwell doesn't get scared. Everyone gets scared. Question is what they do about it. Ronan set down his glass. He could have offered 50,000. Could have offered 100. But he went low because he's already calculating what this fight's going to cost him, and he's trying to minimize losses. You're making a mistake. Probably. I make a lot of them. Ronan leaned back in his chair. But walking away from people who need help isn't one I make anymore. The other two men moved closer, hands drifting toward weapons they probably weren't very good with. Browncoat held up a hand to stop them. Last chance, he said. That's what everyone keeps telling me. Ronan smiled. Funny how the last chance keeps coming around again. Browncoat's hand moved toward his gun. He was slow, telegraphed the draw so badly that Ronan could have stopped him 3 different ways. But the saloon door banged open before anyone could commit to violence, and a woman's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Touch that gun and you'll be bleeding before you clear leather. Everyone froze. She stood in the doorway, backlit by the setting sun, and for a moment she was just a silhouette. Then she stepped inside and Ronan got his first clear look at her. Late 30s, maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back severe and eyes that had seen enough of the world to stop being impressed by it. She wore trousers instead of a dress, practical clothing for hard country, and a gun belt that had clearly seen use. Her hand rested on the pistol grip with the casual comfort of someone who knew exactly what to do with it. Dr. Hart, Browncoat said, and something like respect crept into his voice. This doesn't concern you. Ronan Vale sitting in my town being threatened by Caldwell's dogs? That concerns me just fine. Dr. Abilene Hart moved into the saloon like she owned it. Maybe she did. Now you boys can leave peacefully, or I can start talking about the medical conditions I've treated you for, loudly, in front of witnesses. Browncoat's face went red. You wouldn't try me. The 3 men looked at each other, weighing their options, and apparently decided that whatever Caldwell was paying them wasn't worth having their personal ailments announced to a saloon full of strangers. They left, muttering threats that everyone ignored. Dr. Hart waited until they were gone, then pulled up a chair across from Ronan. You sent Tarek Voss to me, she said. Not a question. I did. His wife's doing better. Treatment's working. Good. He told me what happened. What you did for him. She studied Ronan's face like she was diagnosing an illness. That was decent of you. Don't make me out to be noble, Ronan said. I needed him to make a choice. He made it. I helped him live with it. Still decent. She signaled the bartender, who'd reappeared now that the danger had passed. 2 whiskeys. The good stuff, not the swill you serve the regulars. The bartender poured from a different bottle, and Hart raised her glass. To making choices we can live with, she said. They drank. How long have you been in Black Hollow? Ronan asked. 5 years. Came here thinking I could help people, build a practice, make a difference. She laughed bitterly. Found out pretty quick that Caldwell owns the sick same as he owns everything else. Can't treat someone who can't pay, and can't pay when Caldwell's bought up all the wages. Why stay? Because leaving means he wins. She met his eyes. Same reason you're still here instead of taking whatever money he offered. He offered 10,000. Hart whistled low. That's real money. That's scared money. You really think you can hurt him? Caldwell's been untouchable for 20 years. Men tougher than you have tried. I'm not trying to be tough, Ronan said. I'm trying to be a problem he can't solve by throwing money or bullets at it. The legal challenges, the newspapers. Hart nodded slowly. Smart. Hits him where he actually feels it, his reputation, his deals. But you know he'll fight back hard. I'm counting on it. That's either brave or suicidal. Bit of both, probably. They sat in silence for a moment, 2 people who'd learned that sometimes the hardest thing in the world was just staying put and fighting when running would be easier. I can help, Hart said finally. I know people in San Royal. Been treating families there for years. If you're organizing legal challenges, they'll listen to me. That'll put a target on you. Already got one. Caldwell threatened to revoke my medical license last year because I testified against one of his foremen in an assault case. She smiled grimly. Turns out the Territorial Medical Board doesn't actually answer to him. That particular threat didn't stick. He'll find others. Let him. Hart finished her whiskey and stood. I didn't spend 6 years in medical school and another 10 in frontier practice just to watch sick people die because some rich bastard needs another 1,000 acres. You want to fight him? I'm in. Ronan stood as well, extending his hand. They shook, and he felt the calluses on her palm, the marks of someone who'd worked with their hands for something other than profit. There's a meeting tomorrow night, he said quietly. Abandoned church on the east edge of town. Midnight. Bring anyone from San Royale who can make it. We'll plan this thing properly. I'll be there. She left and Ronan sat back down to finish his terrible whiskey. The bartender sidled over, wiping a glass that was already clean. You're really going after Caldwell, he said. Not a question. Yeah. You'll die. Maybe. The bartender set down his glass. My brother lost his farm to Caldwell 3 years ago. Loney didn't understand terms that changed after he signed. They came and took everything. My brother... He paused. He didn't handle it well. Took his own life that winter. Ronan said nothing. What was there to say? If you're really going after him, the bartender continued, and you need information, places to hide, people who owe Caldwell pain instead of money, you come talk to me. Name Samuel. I'll remember that. Good. Samuel picked up his glass again. Because there's a lot of us. More than Caldwell thinks. And we're all waiting for someone to show us it's possible to fight back. Ronan left the silver dollar as full dark settled over Black Hollow. The streets were quieter now, just the sounds of distant piano music and the occasional bark of a dog. He made his way to a boarding house on the poor side of town, the kind of place where the owner didn't ask questions as long as you paid in advance. His room was small and sparse. Bed, chair, wash basin, window looking out onto an alley where rats fought over garbage. He'd stayed in worse. He pulled out a notebook and began writing names, connections, resources. The families in San Royale Valley, the lawyer in Santa Fe, the judge who owed him, the newspapers who might actually print something if the story was solid enough. And now Dr. Hart, Samuel the bartender, and however many others were out there waiting for someone to light the match. It wasn't much. Against Caldwell's money and influence, it was barely anything, but Ronan had learned a long time ago that revolutions didn't start with armies. They started with a handful of people who decided they'd had enough. He was still writing when the knock came at his door. Ronan's hand moved to his gun automatically. It's open! The door swung inward, and a young boy stood there, maybe 12 years old, skinny as a rail, with eyes that had seen too much too soon. You Ronan Vale? The kid asked. Depends on who's asking. I got a message. Man paid me $1 to deliver it. He held out a folded piece of paper. Ronan took it, read it quickly, and his jaw tightened. The note was simple. They're coming for the doctor tonight. East Clinic, 2 hours. No signature, no other details. Who gave you this? Ronan asked. The kid shrugged. Didn't give a name, just said you'd want to know. Ronan flipped the kid another $1. You see that man again? You tell him I said thanks. The kid vanished into the night, and Ronan was already moving, checking his gun, grabbing his coat. Dr. Hart had made herself a target by helping him, and Caldwell was the type to strike fast when someone became a liability. The East Clinic was a 20-minute walk. Ronan made it in 10, moving through alleys and back streets, staying in the shadows. The building was dark when he arrived, a small, single-story structure that Hart had probably built with her own money because Caldwell sure as hell wouldn't have helped. He circled it once, checking angles and approaches. Found 3 men waiting in the darkness across the street, trying to blend into the shadows and failing. Another 2 around back, near the door Hart probably used when she didn't want visitors. 5 men. Professional muscle from the look of them. Not the kind who asked questions or showed mercy. Ronan could have walked away. Should have, probably. This wasn't his fight yet. Hart had volunteered to help, but she'd made her own choice. He didn't owe her rescue, but that kind of thinking was how good people died alone while bad people won. He moved to the building next to the clinic, found a drain pipe that looked sturdy enough, and climbed. The roof gave him a better vantage point. Could see all 5 men now. Could see they were waiting for Hart to arrive, probably planning to grab her quiet and make her disappear. Caldwell's message was clear. Help Ronan Vale and suffer the consequences. Ronan checked his gun. 6 bullets. 5 men. The math worked if he was careful and lucky. He'd been careful before. Luck was harder to control. He waited, watching, thinking through options. Could take out the 2 and back first. They were separated from the others, easier targets. But gunfire would alert the front 3, and then it became a running fight through streets he didn't know well. Better to even the odds differently. He climbed back down, circled wide, and approached the 2 rear guards from behind. They were talking in low voices, complaining about the cold, about Caldwell's cheapness with wages, about how they'd rather be in a saloon. Ronan hit the first one with his gun barrel, a precise strike to the base of the skull that dropped him silent. The second one turned, started to shout, and Ronan's fist caught him in the throat. The man went down choking, and Ronan made sure he stayed down with another careful blow. 2 unconscious men, 3 bullets saved. He dragged them into deeper shadow, took their weapons, and moved toward the front of the building. The remaining 3 guards were alert now. One of them had heard something, was peering into the darkness, hand on his gun. "Check the back," he ordered the man beside him. That man moved toward where Ronan had just been, and Ronan let him pass, then stepped out behind him. "Looking for something?" Ronan asked quietly. The guard spun, gun coming up, and Ronan shot him in the shoulder. The man screamed and went down, and the other 2 guards opened fire blindly into the darkness. Ronan was already moving, using the clinic wall for cover. Bullets chipped brick beside his head. He counted shots. 3, 4, 5. One of them would need to reload soon. He rolled around the corner, came up firing, and put a bullet through the leg of the nearest guard. The man dropped, cursing. The last guard ran, just turned and sprinted into the night like his life depended on it. Smart man. Ronan checked the wounded. They'd live, though they'd hurt for a while. He was dragging them into a pile when Dr. Hart arrived, medical bag in hand, and stopped dead at the sight before her. "What happened?" "Caldwell sent them for you." She looked at the groaning men, then at Ronan, and something like understanding crossed her face. "You were waiting." "Someone sent warning." "Someone?" She knelt beside the guard Ronan had shot in the shoulder, examining the wound with professional detachment. "You have a guardian angel in this town, Mr. Vale." "Seems like. Or enemies of your enemy are making themselves known." She began pulling medical supplies from her bag. "Either way, we need to move fast. These men will report back soon as they can move, and Caldwell will send more." "You need to leave town tonight." "No." She didn't look up from her work. "I'm not running." "Hart. Dr. Hart," she corrected absently, threading a needle. "And I said no. You don't get to start this fight, drag me into it, and then try to protect me by sending me away. I made my choice." "Your choice might get you killed. Then I'll die doing something that matters." She glanced up, eyes hard. "You think you're the only one tired of watching people suffer? I've been watching it for 5 years. Every patient I couldn't save because they couldn't afford medicine. Every child I treated for malnutrition because Caldwell's company store charges triple for basic food. Every broken bone from work accidents that happened because safety costs money and Caldwell doesn't believe in spending it." She went back to her stitching. "So no, I'm not leaving. I'm staying and I'm fighting, and if you don't like it, that's your problem." Ronan found himself smiling despite everything. "You always this stubborn?" "Only when I'm right." He helped her finish treating the wounded, then they left the guards in the clinic with a note. "This was mercy. Next time won't be." They walked through the dark streets of Black Hollow, 2 people who'd just made themselves undeniable targets, and Hart spoke quietly. "The meeting tomorrow. How many people are you expecting?" "Don't know. Could be 3, could be 30. Depends on how scared they are." "They're terrified," Hart said bluntly. "Caldwell spent 20 years teaching them that fighting back means losing everything. You're asking them to overcome a lifetime of fear in one night." "I know." "So what's your pitch? What do you say to people who've been beaten down so long they've forgotten how to stand up?" Ronan thought about that. About Tarek in the canyon, making his choice. About all the other men and women he'd met over the years who'd stood at similar crossroads. "I tell them the truth. he said finally, that they're going to lose things, that it's going to hurt, that some of them might die. He looked at Hart. But I also tell them that losing while fighting is better than dying on your knees, and that for the first time in 20 years, Caldwell's actually vulnerable. Is he? Yeah, the San Royale deal, the newspaper attention, the legal challenges. It's all pressure on a system he built assuming no one would ever push back. And when you put enough pressure on something that's been rigid for too long, it breaks. They reached the boarding house where Ronan was staying. Hart paused at the bottom of the steps. You really believe we can win this? I believe we can make him bleed. I believe we can cost him enough that he loses the deal, loses his investors, loses his grip on this territory. Ronan met her eyes. Whether that's the same as winning, I don't know, but it's better than what we've got now. Hart nodded slowly. I'll see you tomorrow night. And Ronan, thank you. For tonight. Don't thank me yet. We haven't survived tomorrow. She left, and Ronan climbed the stairs to his room, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline of the fight was wearing off, leaving behind the familiar ache of old injuries and older regrets. He lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, and thought about all the ways this could go wrong. Caldwell had resources, connections, the law on his side. What did Ronan have? A half-formed plan, a handful of allies, and the desperate hope that sometimes courage mattered more than money. It didn't seem like enough, but then it never did. He was drifting toward sleep when he heard it, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, stopping outside his door. Ronan's hand found his gun, and he waited. A piece of paper slid under the door. He listened as the footsteps retreated, waited until they'd faded completely, then retrieved the note. Caldwell knows about the meeting. He's planning to raid it. Bring everyone armed or don't bring them at all. Same handwriting as before. Same mysterious benefactor. Ronan added it to his growing collection of evidence that he wasn't as alone in this as he'd thought. Someone in Caldwell's organization, maybe someone close to the man himself, was feeding him information. The question was why. He'd find out eventually, or he'd die before getting the chance. Either way, tomorrow night's meeting had just gotten a lot more complicated. Ronan closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that the next day would bring violence and choices and consequences he couldn't yet imagine. Somewhere across town, Marcus Caldwell was probably doing the same thing, each man preparing for a confrontation that would reshape Black Hollow's future. And in the darkness between them, 63 families in San Royale Valley waited to learn if hope was real or just another lie told by people who didn't understand how the world actually worked. Tomorrow would provide some answers. Tonight, Ronan just tried to rest. Dawn broke ugly over Black Hollow, all red sky and bruised clouds that promised rain but wouldn't deliver. Ronan watched it through the grimy window of his boarding house room, feeling the weight of the coming day settle into his bones like old arthritis. He'd slept maybe 2 hours, and those had been filled with dreams of gunfire and choices that came too late. The note about Caldwell's planned raid sat on the small table beside his bed. The paper creased from where he'd read it a dozen times during the night. Bring everyone armed or don't bring them at all. Simple advice. Probably good advice. But asking farmers and shopkeepers to come to a midnight meeting carrying weapons was asking them to cross a line most had spent their whole lives avoiding. He dressed slowly, checking his gun out of habit, and headed downstairs. The boarding house keeper, a woman named Martha who'd lost her husband to a mine collapse Caldwell's company had declared an unfortunate accident, was already up, making coffee that smelled like it could strip paint. You look like hell, she said without preamble. Feel worse? She poured him a cup, slid it across the counter. Heard there was trouble at the doctor's clinic last night. News traveled fast in small towns, especially news involving gunshots. Some men came looking for Dr. Hart. I suggested they look somewhere else. Martha's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. Caldwell's men are saying you shot 3 of them. Only 2. The 3rd I just hit. Well, the story's already grown to 5 men and a knife fight. She refilled her own cup. By noon, it'll be 10 men and a small cannon. People need something to talk about, I guess. People need hope, Martha corrected. And right now you're the closest thing to it they've got. Don't waste that. She disappeared into the back room before Ronan could respond, leaving him alone with coffee that tasted like punitive justice and the growing realization that he'd become something he'd never intended to be. A symbol. People were watching him, pinning their hopes on him, expecting him to somehow fix 20 years of systematic exploitation with a gun and good intentions. The pressure of it made him want to ride out of town and never look back. Instead, he finished his coffee and went to find Dr. Hart. Her clinic was open despite the previous night's excitement, with a handful of patients already waiting outside. They looked at Ronan with a mixture of fear and curiosity as he passed, and one old woman actually reached out to touch his sleeve like he was some kind of talisman. "You really gonna fight him?" she whispered. "Yes, ma'am." "Then you be careful. Caldwell's got the devil's own luck. Everyone's luck runs out eventually." He found Hart in her examination room, cleaning instruments with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned that chaos could only be managed through rigid routine. She looked up when he entered, and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes that probably matched his own. "You look terrible," she said. "So I've been told. You sleep?" "Couple hours. Kept waking up thinking I heard someone trying to break in." She set down a scalpel, wiped her hands on a towel. "Got your warning about tonight's meeting." He pulled out the note, showed it to her. She read it twice, her expression hardening. "Someone on the inside," she murmured. "Has to be. Question is who and why." "Does it matter?" "If the information's good, it matters if it's a trap. If someone's feeding me truth mixed with lies to lead us into something worse." Hart considered that, then shook her head. "We don't have the luxury of paranoia. If Caldwell's planning a raid, we need to be ready. That means warning everyone who's coming and making sure they understand what they're walking into." "I know." "Do you?" She fixed him with a look that was pure physician, clinical, assessing, searching for symptoms. "Because I'm getting the sense you're having doubts." Ronan leaned against the examination table, suddenly tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. "Last night I shot 2 men, hurt 3 others. And for what? To protect one person for one night? Caldwell's got hundreds of men. Thousands, maybe, if you count everyone on his payroll across 3 territories. What am I supposed to do? Shoot them all? You're supposed to show people they can fight back without getting killed immediately," Hart said quietly. "That's all leadership is, Ronan. Going first into the dark and lighting a match so others can see the path." "Pretty speech. It's the truth. You think those patients outside care about your doubts? You think the families in San Royale Valley are going to feel better knowing you're scared?" She moved closer, her voice dropping. "We're all scared. Every single one of us. But you're the one who actually did something about it. So yeah, you shot some men. And yeah, more violence is coming. But the alternative was letting Caldwell keep grinding people down until there was nothing left but dust and broken dreams." Ronan met her eyes and saw steel there. The kind that came from setting broken bones and sewing up knife wounds and telling families that someone they loved wasn't coming home. She'd seen the cost of violence up close, and she was still choosing to fight. "All right," he said. "Then let's make sure tonight counts." They spent the morning planning. Hart had a list of people in San Royale who might come. Farmers, a blacksmith, a schoolteacher named Rose, who apparently had a spine made of iron and opinions about Caldwell that could peel paint. Ronan added names from Black Hollow itself. Samuel the bartender, a warehouse foreman who'd been shorted on wages one too many times, a widow whose husband had died in Caldwell's mines. The list grew to maybe 40 people, 40 against an empire. The math was laughable. "We need weapons," Hart said, chewing her pencil like it had personally offended her. "Most of these folks have hunting rifles, maybe a pistol, but if Caldwell's men come heavy, they will. Then we need more than farmhands with squirrel guns." Ronan thought about that. "There's an armory in Black Hollow. Caldwell's men use it to store weapons for the mine guards and his personal security." "You're joking." "I'm really not. Saw it when I was scouting the town. 2-story brick building on the north edge, bars on the windows, usually 3 guards. Hart stared at him. "You want to rob Caldwell's armory the same day we're trying to organize resistance against him? I want to make sure the people coming tonight have a fighting chance if things go bad." "That's insane." "Probably. Definitely." But she was already thinking, he could see it in her eyes. "We'd need a distraction, something to pull the guards away. I might know someone who can help with that." He found Samuel at the Silver Dollar, wiping down tables in preparation for another night of selling cheap whiskey to desperate men. The bartender looked up, saw Ronan, and immediately wiped his hands on his apron like he was preparing for something important. "Heard about the clinic," Samuel said. "Whole town's talking." "Let them talk. I need a favor." "Name it." Ronan laid out the plan. Samuel listened without interrupting, his expression cycling through disbelief, concern, and finally settling on something that looked like grim determination. "You're asking me to start a fire," Samuel said slowly. "A small one, controlled. In that abandoned warehouse near the armory. Enough smoke to draw attention, not enough to actually burn down half the town. And while the guards are dealing with the fire, you break into the armory." That's the idea. Samuel drummed his fingers on the bar, thinking, "My brother died because of Caldwell. I told you that. And I've been carrying that anger around for 3 years, not knowing what to do with it except let it eat me alive." He looked up. "This is probably the stupidest thing I've ever agreed to, but yeah, I'll do it. You'll need help. Someone to make sure the fire doesn't spread. Someone to watch for patrols. I know some people. Men who've lost things to Caldwell. They'll help." He paused. "When?" "This afternoon. 3 hours before the meeting. Gives us time to distribute weapons and get people in position." "And if we get caught?" "Then we get caught, but we go down swinging." Samuel extended his hand and they shook on it. 2 men committing to a plan that would either start a revolution or get them both killed, maybe both. Ronan left the saloon and made his way through Black Hollow's streets, feeling eyes on him from every window and doorway. The town knew something was coming. You could feel it in the air, that electric tension that preceded storms and gunfights and moments when history pivoted on choices made by ordinary people. He was cutting through an alley when the voice stopped him. "Mr. Vale?" Ronan turned, hand moving toward his gun, and found himself facing a young man in a suit that was too nice for Black Hollow. Clean-shaven, nervous eyes, holding a leather satchel like it might explode. "Who's asking?" "My name is David Chen. I'm a clerk in Caldwell's land office." The words came out in a rush, like he'd been rehearsing them. "And I'm the one who's been sending you notes." Ronan studied him carefully. Mid-20s, soft hands that had never done manual labor. The kind of person who got hired because they could read contracts and keep quiet. But there was something in his eyes. Anger, maybe, or shame, or both. "Why?" "Because I'm tired of being part of the machine that destroys people." Chen glanced around nervously, making sure they were alone. "I've been working for Caldwell for 2 years. I've processed the foreclosures, drafted the eviction notices, filed the paperwork that transfers land from families who've worked it for generations to corporations that'll strip it bare and move on. And I've told myself it's just business, just my job, not my responsibility. But last month I processed the San Royale acquisitions. 63 families. I knew most of them, had met them when I was doing the survey work, seen their children, eaten meals in their homes. And when I handed those files to Caldwell, he smiled." Chen's voice cracked slightly. He smiled like he'd just won a prize. And I realized I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't be the person who makes evil efficient. Ronan relaxed his hand away from his gun. "So you started feeding me information. Anything I thought might help. The Continental cattle deal, the timeline, the raid tonight." He opened his satchel, pulled out a thick folder. "And this. Everything I could copy from Caldwell's private files. Financial records, correspondence with investors, legal contracts that might not hold up under real scrutiny." Ronan took the folder, flipped through it quickly. It was a treasure trove. Evidence of fraud, manipulation, deals that skirted legality so closely they'd probably snap under the weight of a real investigation. "This could destroy him," Ronan said quietly. "That's the idea." Chen wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. "But you need to move fast. Caldwell's getting paranoid. He knows there's a leak somewhere in his organization. He's already fired 3 people on suspicion. It's only a matter of time before he figures out it's me." "Then you need to get out of Black Hollow. Today." "I know, I've got a sister in Denver. I'm taking the afternoon stage." Chen hesitated. "There's one more thing. The raid tonight, Caldwell's not just sending his usual thugs. He's hired professional guns. Men who've done this before, who won't hesitate, who'll shoot first and won't bother with questions later." "How many?" 20, maybe 25. They arrived this morning on a private train. The numbers hit Ronan like a fist. 25 professional killers against 40 farmers and shopkeepers. Even with weapons from the armory, even with surprise and determination, those odds were brutal. "You're telling me this is suicide," Ronan said. "I'm telling you that you need to be smarter than Caldwell expects. He's planning an overwhelming show of force because he thinks you're just one man with a gun and some angry farmers. He doesn't know about the legal challenges, the newspaper contacts, all the pieces you've been putting together." Chen gripped his satchel tighter. "Hit him where he's not looking. Use the information I gave you to hurt him in ways he can't shoot back at. And the people coming tonight? Just let them walk into a massacre? Cancel the meeting, or move it, or—" Chen stopped, took a breath. "I don't know. I'm a clerk, not a tactician, but I know that getting everyone killed tonight won't help San Royal Valley. It'll just make Caldwell stronger." Ronan wanted to argue, wanted to insist that sometimes you had to stand and fight even when the odds were impossible. But Chen was right. Leading people into a slaughter wasn't bravery. It was waste. "Thank you," Ronan said finally, "for the risk you took, for choosing the right side." Chen smiled weakly. "I chose the side I can live with. Whether it's right, history will decide." He adjusted his satchel. "Good luck, Mr. Vale. I hope you survive long enough to use that information." He walked away quickly, disappearing into the morning crowds, and Ronan stood in the alley holding a folder full of ammunition that could end Caldwell's empire, if he lived long enough to fire it. He found Dr. Hart at the clinic, told her everything. She listened in silence, her face growing darker as the implications settled in. 25 professional guns, she repeated. "That changes everything." "Yeah. So what do we do? Cancel?" Ronan looked at the folder in his hands, thinking about all the people who'd said they'd come tonight. People who'd been beaten down for so long that this meeting represented the first glimmer of real hope they'd had in years. Cancel now. And that hope died. Maybe forever. "We changed the plan," he said. "Instead of one big meeting, we split up. Small groups, different locations, people who trust each other. We distribute the information from Chen's files, show them what we've got, and we organize properly. Not just anger and guns, but legal challenges, public pressure, newspaper attention. Everything Caldwell can't fight with bullets." Hart nodded slowly. "And the armory raid? Still happens? We need those weapons. But we're not arming farmers for a battle tonight. We're arming them for a siege. Something longer, smarter, more sustainable." "And the hired guns Caldwell brought in? Let them sit around waiting for a fight that doesn't come. Every day they wait is another day Caldwell's paying them for nothing. Eventually they'll leave or he'll run out of money to keep them." Ronan met her eyes. "This isn't about one dramatic confrontation. It's about grinding him down, piece by piece, until his empire collapses from the weight of its own corruption. That could take months, years even. Maybe, but it's got a better chance of working than getting everyone killed in one night." Hart was quiet for a long moment. Then she surprised him by laughing, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. "What?" Ronan asked. "I was ready to die tonight, had made my peace with it, and now you're telling me I have to live through months of legal battles and bureaucratic warfare instead." She shook her head. "Death would have been easier." "Usually is. All right then, I'll start getting word out about the change in plans. But Ronan? People are going to be disappointed. They wanted a fight." "They'll get one, just not the one they expected." She left to begin the careful, dangerous work of spreading the new plan through a community where anyone could be Caldwell's informant. Ronan spent the rest of the morning making copies of the most damning documents from Chen's folder, hiding the originals in 3 different locations around Black Hollow. Insurance, in case something happened to him. 3 o'clock came faster than he wanted. He met Samuel and 4 other men behind the abandoned warehouse, all of them carrying oil and rags and the kind of nervous energy that came from knowing you were about to commit a crime. "You sure about this?" one of them asked. A miner named Cooper, with scars from a cave-in Caldwell's company, had caused through cheap tunnel supports. "No," Ronan admitted, "but we're doing it anyway." They worked quickly, professionally, setting up the fire to burn hot and smoky but contained. Samuel had thought it through. The warehouse was isolated enough that spread was unlikely, but visible enough that guards would have to respond. When everything was ready, Samuel looked at Ronan. "Once I light this, there's no going back." "There hasn't been a way back since I walked into Caldwell's office." "Light it." The match caught, and flames raced across the oil-soaked rags faster than Ronan had expected. Within minutes, thick black smoke was pouring from the warehouse windows, and he could hear shouts from the direction of the armory. "Go," Samuel said. "We'll make sure it doesn't spread." Ronan ran, covering the 3 blocks to the armory at a dead sprint. Just as Chen had predicted, the guards had abandoned their post to deal with the fire. The door was locked, but Ronan had come prepared. A crowbar he'd borrowed from Samuel's back room made short work of the cheap lock. Inside, the armory was exactly what he'd hoped for and feared. Rifles lined one wall, maybe 40 of them. Pistols in locked cases. Ammunition crates stacked floor to ceiling. Enough weapons to outfit a small war. He worked fast, loading rifles into a stolen cart he'd hidden nearby, cramming boxes of ammunition around them. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of what he was doing. Robbing the man who'd put a price on his head, stealing the tools of violence to arm people who'd probably never fired a shot in anger. He was halfway done when he heard the voice behind him. "Well now, this is interesting." Ronan turned, hand moving toward his gun, and stopped cold. Silas Creed stood in the doorway, the same bounty hunter from Red Mesa Canyon who'd led the hunt for Ronan weeks ago. He looked worse than when Ronan had last seen him, a bandage wrapped around his head, his right arm in a sling, moving with the careful stiffness of someone who'd taken a beating and barely survived it. "Creed," Ronan said quietly. "Vele." The older man's smile was ugly. "Thought I might find you stirring up trouble in Black Hollow. Caldwell sent word he was having problems. Figured you'd be the cause. You working for him now?" "I'm working for anyone who pays. Caldwell's money spends same as the bounty did." Creed's good hand rested on his gun. "Though I'll admit, catching you myself has a certain personal appeal. You couldn't catch me with 5 men. What makes you think you can do it alone?" "Because you're standing in the middle of a locked armory with your hands full of stolen rifles, and I've got a clear shot." His smile widened. "Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good." Ronan calculated angles, distances, options. Creed was right. He was vulnerable here, caught in the open with no cover. Drawing on the old bounty hunter would be suicide. "What do you want?" Ronan asked. "What I've always wanted. That bounty money. Caldwell's raised it to 6,000, by the way. Seems you've become more valuable since we last met." "I'm flattered." "Don't be. It just means more people will try to kill you." Creed took a step into the armory, his gun still holstered, but his intentions clear. "Here's how this works. You come with me quiet. I take you to Caldwell, collect my money, and everyone walks away happy. Except me. Except you. But you had to know this was how it ended. Men like us don't retire to rocking chairs, Vale. We die bloody, and we die young. Speak for yourself. I'm planning on making it to 40. You're 36. That gives you 4 years. I'll take those odds." Creed's hand moved toward his gun. "Last chance. Come quiet or come bleeding, but you're coming." The explosion saved Ronan's life. It came from somewhere outside, a deep, thunderous boom that shook the armory walls and sent dust raining from the ceiling. Creed turned reflexively toward the sound, and Ronan moved. He threw a rifle at Creed's head. The old hunter dodged, went for his gun, but his wounded arm slowed him just enough. Ronan was across the distance between them in 3 strides, hitting Creed low and hard, driving them both into the wall. They went down in a tangle of limbs and violence. Creed's gun clattered away. Ronan's fist found the other man's ribs, once, twice, 3 times. Creed fought back with the desperate strength of someone who'd survived too many fights to lose this one, his good hand finding Ronan's throat and squeezing. The world narrowed to that pressure, that need for air. Ronan brought his knee up hard, connected with something soft, and Creed's grip loosened. They rolled apart, both gasping, both reaching for weapons that weren't there. Outside, voices were shouting. The explosion had drawn attention. Soon this place would be swarming with Caldwell's men. Ronan grabbed the nearest rifle, swung it like a club, and caught Creed across the temple. The old hunter went down hard and stayed down. "Sorry," Ronan muttered, though Creed couldn't hear him. "Nothing personal." He finished loading the cart at a dead run, threw a blanket over the weapons, and dragged it out the back door just as he heard boots pounding toward the front. The explosion had come from the warehouse. Samuel must have gotten creative with the fire. Ronan pulled the cart through back alleys and side streets, every muscle screaming, his lungs burning from exertion and fear. He made it 6 blocks before he had to stop, leaning against a wall, fighting the urge to vomit from the adrenaline crash. He'd done it, actually done it, stolen enough weapons to arm the resistance and lived to tell about it. Now he just had to make sure those weapons didn't get everyone killed. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of frantic activity. Ronan distributed weapons to people he trusted, who distributed them to people they trusted, building a network of armed citizens who understood this wasn't about one fight, but about sustained resistance. Dr. Hart worked her own network, spreading the word about the changed plans, the small group meetings, the long game they were now playing. By nightfall, the original meeting location, the abandoned church on the east edge of town, sat empty and dark. But scattered throughout Black Hollow and the surrounding territory, in barns and basements and back rooms, small groups gathered to look at the documents David Chen had stolen, to understand the full scope of Caldwell's corruption, and to begin planning a response that wouldn't rely on bullets alone. Ronan attended 3 of these meetings, speaking quietly about legal challenges and public pressure and the importance of patience. Some people listened, others grumbled about wanting action, wanting revenge, wanting Caldwell's blood. He understood the impulse, but understanding and indulging were different things. It was near midnight when he finally made it back to his boarding house, exhausted in ways that went beyond physical. Martha was waiting up, which surprised him. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you." She gestured to a chair. "Sit. You look like you're about to fall over." He sat gratefully, and she poured him coffee that was somehow even worse than this morning's batch. "I heard what happened today," Martha said. "The fire, the armory, the change in plans. People are talking. Let them talk. Some are saying you chickened out, got scared when you learned Caldwell brought in professional guns." Ronan took a sip of terrible coffee. "What do you think?" Martha studied him with eyes that had seen too much hardship to be fooled by easy lies. "I think you chose the harder path. Fighting's easy. You point a gun, you pull a trigger, and you live or die based on who's faster. But what you're doing now, organizing, strategizing, keeping people alive while you dismantle an empire piece by piece, that takes real courage. Doesn't feel courageous. Feels like running. Because you're young enough to confuse violence with bravery." She refilled his cup even though he hadn't asked. "My husband died fighting Caldwell. Not with guns, but in court, trying to get safety improvements in the mines. He stood up, he spoke out, and Caldwell crushed him with lawyers and money and quiet threats until the fight broke something inside him. The collapse that killed him was ruled an accident, but we both know the truth." "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Learn from it. My husband's mistake wasn't fighting. It was fighting alone, fighting openly, giving Caldwell a clear target." She met his eyes. "You're not making that mistake. You're building something he can't crush with money or violence. That's worth more than 100 brave corpses." Ronan wanted to believe her, wanted to think that he was making the right choices, that his caution was wisdom rather than cowardice. But the voice in his head that sounded like his father kept whispering that real men face their enemies head on, that all this scheming and planning was just elaborate running. He finished his coffee in silence, thanked Martha, and climbed the stairs to his room. The note was waiting for him, slid under the door while he'd been out. "Caldwell knows about the weapons. His men are searching for them. Move everything again or lose it all." David Chen still helping even after he'd left town. Or maybe it wasn't Chen at all. Maybe there were more people inside Caldwell's organization who were tired of serving evil. The thought gave Ronan a sliver of hope. If the Empire was cracking from the inside, maybe they actually had a chance. He spent 2 hours that night moving weapons again, redistributing them to new hiding spots, making sure no single loss would cripple their ability to defend themselves when the time came. It was exhausting, tedious work that left his hands blistered and his back screaming. But it was necessary. Because somewhere across town, in his mansion that had been built with money squeezed from desperate people, Marcus Caldwell was planning his next move. And when it came, when the real battle finally began, Ronan needed to make sure his people had every possible advantage. He fell asleep just before dawn, still wearing his boots, his gun on the table beside him, and dreamed of nothing at all. The second note arrived 3 days later, and this time the handwriting was different, shakier, written in what looked like dried blood. They found Chen. He's dead. Get out while you can. Ronan stared at those words until they blurred, feeling something cold settle in his chest. David Chen, the clerk who'd risked everything to do the right thing, who'd handed over evidence that could topple an empire, who'd gotten on a stage heading to Denver thinking he'd escaped. Dead now. Probably tortured first, definitely made an example of. The message was clear. This is what happens to traitors. Dr. Hart found him an hour later, sitting on the steps of the boarding house with the note crumpled in his fist. She didn't ask what was wrong, just sat down beside him and waited. Chen's dead, Ronan said finally. I heard. Word came in on the morning telegraph. Stage was stopped 20 miles outside Black Hollow. Bandits, they're calling it, but everyone knows better. He gave us everything, every piece of evidence we needed, and Caldwell killed him for it. Yes. Hart's voice was flat, accepting. That's what powerful men do when you threaten them. They kill, and they make sure everyone knows why. Ronan looked at her. Doesn't that bother you? That we're the reason he's dead? Of course it bothers me, but Chen made his choice knowing the risks. We don't dishonor that choice by collapsing under the guilt. She took the note from his hand, read it, and tore it into small pieces. We honor it by making sure his death meant something. How? Caldwell's already tightening security, hunting for the documents Chen gave us, probably torturing anyone he suspects of disloyalty. We've barely started, and he's already killing people. Then we move faster. Hart stood, brushing dust from her trousers. The lawyer from Santa Fe arrives today. Judge Morrison agreed to hear preliminary arguments next week. And I've got Rose from San Royale ready to testify about the loan terms. Turns out she kept every piece of paper Caldwell's bank gave her, and the discrepancies between what they promised and what they delivered are damning. One testimony won't... It's not one. I found 6 other families willing to go on record. 6 families who understand they might lose everything, might end up like Chen, but who are doing it anyway because they're tired of being afraid. She offered her hand. Come on, we've got work to do, and sitting here drowning in guilt doesn't help anyone. Ronan took her hand and let her pull him to his feet, though part of him wanted to stay on those steps forever, avoiding the weight of what came next. The lawyer from Santa Fe turned out to be a woman in her 50s named Eleanor Vasquez, with gray-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that could probably spot a contract loophole from across a crowded room. She arrived on the noon train carrying 2 heavy cases full of legal books and an expression that suggested she ate railroad barons for breakfast. Mr. Vale, she said, extending a hand that gripped like iron. I've heard quite a bit about you. All bad, I'm sure. Depends on your perspective. Caldwell thinks you're a terrorist. The families in San Royale think you're salvation. I prefer to deal in facts rather than mythology. She glanced at Dr. Hart. You must be the physician who's been coordinating the testimonies. Guilty. Good. I'll need to interview each witness separately, verify their documentation, and prepare statements that will hold up under cross-examination. Caldwell's attorneys are the best money can buy, which means we need to be better. Vasquez set down her cases with a heavy thud. Where can we work? They commandeered a back room in the Silver Dollar, Samuel having offered the space without being asked. For the next 6 hours, Vasquez methodically tore apart every piece of evidence Chen had provided, cross-referencing dates, checking signatures, building a case that was part legal brief and part demolition plan. Ronan watched her work with something like awe. This woman didn't carry a gun, didn't make threats, didn't rely on fear or violence. But the way she dissected contracts and found the poison hidden in legal language was its own form of warfare. This clause here, Vasquez said, tapping a loan agreement with one sharp fingernail. It allows for reasonable adjustments to interest rates based on market conditions. Vague enough to sound legitimate, predatory enough to be criminal. Caldwell's banks were raising rates every month, sometimes by as much as 15%, and calling it market adjustment. Can you prove it? Hart asked. If I can get access to the bank's internal records showing what they considered market conditions versus what they actually charged, yes. But those records are locked in Caldwell's main office, and I doubt he'll hand them over willingly. Ronan thought about the folder Chen had given him, the copies he'd made and hidden throughout Black Hollow. What if I told you I might be able to get those records? Vasquez looked at him over the rim of her reading glasses. I'd say I don't want to know how. and I'd advise you that any evidence obtained illegally is inadmissible in court. But if someone happened to find them, say, left anonymously on a judge's desk, then that someone would be performing a public service, and I would be very grateful while maintaining complete ignorance of their methods. She smiled thinly. Do we understand each other? Perfectly. By evening, Vasquez had compiled a preliminary case that ran to 47 pages of dense legal argument. She read sections aloud to Ronan and Hart, translating the legalese into plain language that cut like razors. What Caldwell did was simple, she explained. He identified families who were struggling but stable, offered them loans with terms that looked reasonable on paper but were designed to become impossible. When they inevitably fell behind, he bought their debts from his own banks he controls, at a fraction of face value. Then he foreclosed, took the land, and leased it back to corporations at 10 times what he'd paid. It's fraud dressed up as business. And you can prove this in court? Ronan asked. I can prove elements of it, enough to create reasonable doubt about the legitimacy of the foreclosures, enough to force a delay in the Continental cattle deal. She closed her notebook. But proof isn't the same as justice. Caldwell has judges in his pocket, politicians on his payroll, newspapers that print what he tells them to print. We're not just fighting one man, we're fighting an entire system built to protect people like him. So what's the point? Hart asked, and there was real frustration in her voice. If the system's rigged, why bother? Because systems break, Vasquez said quietly. They look invincible until someone finds the weak point and pushes. Sometimes that push fails. Sometimes it starts a crack that spreads until the whole thing collapses. She looked at both of them. I've spent 30 years fighting men like Caldwell, lost more cases than I've won. But the ones I won changed things. Not completely, not permanently, but enough that some families kept their homes, some workers got fair wages, some towns remembered they didn't have to accept tyranny as the price of commerce. She gathered her papers, stood, and stretched like someone whose back had been protesting hours of hunching over documents. Judge Morrison hears our petition in 5 days. Between now and then, I need witness statements, documented evidence of the fraudulent loan terms, and anything else that shows pattern and practice of predatory lending. Can you get me that? We can try, Hart said. Then try hard, because once we file this petition, Caldwell will come at us with everything he has. Legal, illegal, and everything in between. Vasquez paused at the door. One more thing. The moment we step into that courtroom, you both become targets. Not just for intimidation, but for elimination. Caldwell's already killed to protect his empire. He won't hesitate to kill again. We know, Ronan said. Do you? Really? She studied him with those sharp eyes. Because knowing in your head and understanding in your gut are different things. When his men come, and they will come, you need to be ready not just to fight back, but to keep fighting after people you care about get hurt. That's the part that breaks most people. She left, and Ronan and Hart sat in silence for a long moment. She's cheerful, Hart said finally. She's honest. Same thing, apparently. Hart rubbed her eyes, suddenly looking as exhausted as Ronan felt. Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing? If maybe it would be better to just let Caldwell win and save everyone the pain? Every day. But I keep thinking about Tarek, about the choice he made in that canyon. He could have shot me, collected the bounty, saved his wife with blood money. Instead, he chose to be someone he could live with. Ronan leaned back in his chair. If we walk away now, let Caldwell crush those families in San Royale, what are we? Just people who knew the right thing and chose the easy thing instead. The right thing might get us killed. Probably will, eventually. But at least we'll die as ourselves instead of whatever we'd become by walking away. Hart laughed, short and bitter. That's either wisdom or rationalization, can't tell which. Maybe both. They worked through the night, Hart reaching out to witnesses while Ronan made copies of more documents from Chen's files. By dawn, they had statements from 8 families, all telling variations of the same story. Predatory loans, shifting terms, foreclosures that felt more like theft than business. Ronan was delivering the documents to Vasquez's hotel room when he spotted the tail. 2 men, trying to look casual, following him from 3 blocks back. Not Caldwell's usual muscle, these were professionals, moving with the kind of disciplined patience that said they knew their business. He didn't try to lose them. Instead, he led them on a winding path through Black Hollow's morning streets, checking reflections in windows, memorizing faces, cataloging weapons. By the time he reached the hotel, he'd counted 4 men total, rotating positions, covering all exits. Caldwell was escalating. Vasquez took the documents without comment, her eyes scanning them quickly. This is good. Better than good. With this in the testimonies, we might actually have a case. Might? Morrison's a fair judge, but he's also practical. If Caldwell can show these foreclosures followed proper legal procedure, and his lawyers are good enough to make almost anything look legal, the judge might rule that personal hardship doesn't invalidate a contract. She set the papers down. Our best chance is proving systematic fraud, that Caldwell deliberately designed these loans to fail, that he manipulated market conditions to justify rate increases, that he's essentially running a criminal enterprise disguised as legitimate banking. Can you prove that? Not with what we have now. I'd need those internal bank records I mentioned, the ones showing what they actually considered market conditions versus what they told borrowers. Ronan thought about the main office where he'd confronted Caldwell, about the file cabinets, the ledgers, the maps showing every piece of stolen land. What if I could get them? I already told you. I know. You don't want to know how. But hypothetically, if those records appeared, would they be enough? Vasquez studied him for a long moment. Yes. With those records, I could prove fraud. And fraud invalidates contracts, which means the foreclosures are void, which means Caldwell loses everything. Then I'll get them. Ronan, she stopped, seemed to reconsider whatever she was about to say. Be careful. Caldwell's not stupid. He knows we need those records. He'll be protecting them. I know. Then you also know this is probably a trap. I know that too. He left before she could try to talk him out of it, stepping back into Black Hollow's morning streets where the professional tails were waiting. They followed him to the boarding house, staying back just far enough to maintain the fiction that he didn't know they were there. Ronan spent the day preparing, checking weapons, planning routes, trying to think of every way this could go wrong. The list was long and getting longer. Dr. Hart found him in the early afternoon, carrying a medical bag that looked heavier than usual. I heard you're planning something stupid, she said without preamble. Who told you? Vasquez. She's worried you're going to get yourself killed before the hearing. Probably. That's not funny. Wasn't trying to be. Ronan checked his pistol for the 3rd time, a nervous habit he couldn't seem to break. Those bank records are the key to everything. Without them, Vasquez is just making arguments. With them, she's got proof. And if you die trying to get them, then someone else will have to finish what we started. Hart set down her bag with more force than necessary. You don't get to do that. You don't get to turn yourself into a martyr and pretend that's the same as leadership. I'm not. Yes, you are. You're planning to walk into Caldwell's office, knowing it's probably a trap, because some part of you thinks dying for the cause is nobler than living through the messy work of actually winning. She moved closer, and there was real anger in her eyes now. Well, here's the truth. We need you alive. Not as a symbol, not as a story people tell, but as an actual person who keeps fighting tomorrow and the day after that. So whatever suicide mission you're planning, you're going to do it smart, with backup, and with an actual plan to survive. Ronan wanted to argue, to insist he'd thought this through. But Hart was right. Part of him had been treating this like a final stand, a last dramatic gesture that would either win everything or end him. That wasn't strategy, it was ego dressed up as sacrifice. What do you suggest? He asked. Start with not going alone. Take Samuel, take Cooper, take anyone who can watch your back and actually shoot straight. More people means more risk. More people means you might live long enough to see whether this works. She pulled items from her medical bag, bandages, forceps, bottles of laudanum. And if you do insist on getting shot, at least carry these so someone can patch you up before you bleed out. He took the medical supplies, tucking them into his coat. You really think we can win this? I think we can make Caldwell hurt enough that he'll think twice before doing this to someone else. Whether that's winning, I don't know. But it's more than we had a month ago. That night, Ronan gathered a small group in the back room of the Silver Dollar. Samuel was there, along with Cooper the miner, a ranch hand named Thomas, who'd lost his land to Caldwell 2 years back, and Martha from the boarding house, who'd insisted on coming despite being 60 and having a bad hip. "We're going after the bank records," Ronan explained, laying out a rough map of Caldwell's office building. "They're kept in the main file room, second floor, probably locked in a safe or vault. We get in, get the records, get out. Simple." "Nothing about this is simple," Samuel said. "Caldwell's got men watching that building day and night, and after you robbed his armory, he's doubled security." "I know, which is why we're not going through the front." Ronan traced a line on the map. "There's a service entrance in back used for deliveries, less guarded. We go in there, move fast, use the confusion to our advantage." "What confusion?" Cooper asked. "The confusion we create." Ronan looked at Martha. "How do you feel about starting another fire?" She smiled grimly. "I feel just fine about it." They planned for 2 hours, working through contingencies and backup plans. It wasn't perfect. Nothing involving breaking into a heavily guarded building in the middle of the night could be perfect, but it was as solid as they could make it. Midnight found them positioned around Caldwell's office building, moving through shadows that seemed darker than they should be. Martha and Thomas were setting up their distraction 3 blocks away. Another warehouse fire, carefully controlled but smoky enough to draw attention. Ronan, Samuel, and Cooper waited in the alley behind the main building, watching the guard rotation, counting seconds between patrols. The professional tails from that morning were nowhere to be seen, which worried Ronan more than if they'd been visible. Absent meant they were inside, waiting. "This is a trap," Samuel whispered. "Yeah," Ronan agreed, "and we're walking into it anyway." "Yeah. Just wanted to make sure we were all clear on that." Smoke began rising from the direction of the warehouse. Shouts echoed through the night. 2 of the guards outside Caldwell's building took off running toward the fire, leaving only one at the back entrance. "Now," Ronan said. They moved fast and quiet. Cooper took the guard from behind, a chokehold that put him down without a sound. Samuel picked the lock while Ronan covered them, gun drawn, every nerve screaming that this was wrong, this was too easy. They were being funneled exactly where Caldwell wanted them. The lock clicked open. Inside, the building was dark except for thin strips of lamplight under a few doors. The file room was upstairs, according to the building plans Chen had included in his stolen documents. They climbed carefully, avoiding the stairs that creaked, moving like ghosts through a house that wanted them dead. The file room door was locked but not alarmed. Samuel worked his magic again, and they slipped inside to find rows of cabinets, filing systems organized with the kind of obsessive precision that spoke to Caldwell's need for control. "Bank records, internal correspondence, anything with dates and numbers," Ronan said quietly, and they began pulling files. They were halfway through the 3rd cabinet when Ronan heard it, the soft click of a gun being cocked. "Gentlemen," Caldwell's voice came from the doorway, smooth and utterly unsurprised. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't show." Lights flooded the room, and Ronan found himself staring at Caldwell flanked by 8 armed men, all with weapons trained on the 3 intruders. "Put your guns down," Caldwell continued. "Slowly. Any sudden moves and my men will paint this room with your insides." Ronan calculated angles, odds, outcomes. All of them ended badly. He set his gun on the filing cabinet, and Samuel and Cooper followed suit. "Smart," Caldwell said. "Smarter than breaking into my building, certainly, but we work with what we have." He stepped into the room, immaculate even at this hour, his walking stick tapping against the floor. "I assume you were looking for these?" He held up a leather folder, the same kind that had held the bank's internal records in Chen's stolen files. "How did you—" Samuel started. "How did I know you'd come for them?" "Because you're predictable, Mr. Vale. Noble. Determined, willing to risk everything for evidence that might help people you've never met." Caldwell opened the folder, showed them blank pages. "Of course, the actual records are somewhere far safer. These are just bait, but you bit so readily." Ronan's mind raced, looking for exits that didn't exist, for advantages that weren't there. "You killed Chen for nothing, then?" "We already have copies of everything he gave us." "Oh, I killed Chen for betrayal, not information. There's a difference." Caldwell closed the folder. "As for the copies, I'm aware. My people are collecting them as we speak. Every hiding place you thought was secret, every contact you thought was secure. I've known about them for days. Did you really think you could operate in my town without me knowing every move you made?" The words hit Ronan like fists. If Caldwell knew about the copies, knew about the witnesses, knew about everything, then the entire case Vasquez was building could collapse before it even reached court. The lawyer, Caldwell continued, reading Ronan's expression. Yes, I know about her too. Impressive woman, actually. Quite skilled. It won't matter. Judge Morrison has already been persuaded to view your petition with appropriate skepticism. The hearing will be a formality. You'll lose, the families in San Royale will be evicted on schedule, and my deal with Continental Cattle will proceed as planned. You can't buy every judge, Ronan said. I don't need to buy every judge, just the ones who matter. Caldwell smiled. This is over, Mr. Vale. You fought well, I'll grant you that. Caused me more trouble than I expected, but the outcome was never in doubt. Power doesn't lose to passion. It never has. One of the armed men stepped forward. Silas Creed, bandaged but mobile, grinning like someone who'd been waiting for this moment. Want me to shoot him now, Mr. Caldwell? Creed asked. Not yet. I want Mr. Vale to watch his little rebellion collapse first. I want him to understand that everything he did, every risk he took, every person he inspired, it was all for nothing. Caldwell turned toward the door. Lock them in the holding cells downstairs. Make sure they're comfortable. They'll have front row seats to tomorrow's evictions. The guards moved in, and there was nothing Ronan could do except let them. They were disarmed, outnumbered, trapped in a building owned by the man they'd been fighting. Every advantage had evaporated like morning mist. They were searched roughly. The medical supplies Hart had given Ronan confiscated along with everything else. Then they were marched downstairs to a basement Ronan hadn't known existed. Converted storage rooms with bars on the doors, makeshift prison cells for people Caldwell needed to disappear quietly. The cell door slammed shut with a sound like finality. Samuel sat down heavily on the floor. Well, that went poorly. Yeah, Ronan agreed. Cooper was pacing, angry and scared. We're dead. You know that, right? Soon as Caldwell doesn't need us anymore, we're dead. Probably. That's all you've got to say? Probably. Ronan looked at the younger man, saw the fear there, and felt something settle in his chest. Not acceptance, he wasn't ready to accept defeat, but clarity. They'd lost this round, lost it badly. But Caldwell had made one mistake. He'd let them live long enough to watch, which meant there was still time to act. How much laudanum did Hart give you? Samuel asked, noticing Ronan's expression. None. They took it all. Ronan moved to the bars, testing them. Solid, no give. But she gave me something else. An idea. What kind of idea? The kind where we don't sit here waiting to die. He examined the cells systematically, looking for weaknesses. The bars were new, the lock was solid, but the door frame was old wood that hadn't been properly maintained. And the hinges were on the inside of the cell, accessible if you had the right tools, which they didn't, but they had belt buckles, buttons, anything metal that could be worked into a makeshift screwdriver. Start stripping, Ronan said. Anything metal, anything we can use to work those hinges. Cooper looked at him like he'd lost his mind, but Samuel caught on immediately. They spent the next hour carefully dismantling their own clothing, fashioning crude tools from belt hardware and coat fasteners. The hinge screws were rusted, which was both blessing and curse. They fought every turn, but they also gave way in increments, metal protesting but surrendering. It took 3 hours to remove 4 screws. Another 2 for the remaining ones. By the time they heard boots on the stairs, guards coming to check on them, they'd loosened the hinges enough that the door could be forced. Not yet, Ronan whispered. Wait for the right moment. The guard peered through the bars, saw them sitting peacefully, and moved on. They waited. Dawn light began filtering through high basement windows. Somewhere above, Ronan could hear the building coming to life. Footsteps, voices, the routine business of empire. When? Samuel asked. Soon, when they move us. That's when we'll have the best chance. The boots on the stairs came again, multiple pairs this time. Creed appeared with 4 guards, all armed, all looking eager for violence. Mr. Caldwell wants you upstairs, Creed said. Time for you to watch the show. The cell door opened and Ronan moved. He hit it with his shoulder, the loosened hinges giving way, and the entire door came off its frame. It caught 2 guards by surprise, knocking them backward. Ronan was already moving past them, grabbing a fallen rifle, swinging it like a club. Samuel and Cooper followed, fists flying, desperation making them faster than training would have. The basement erupted into chaos, bodies colliding, guns firing wild, shouts echoing off stone walls. Ronan took a punch to the jaw that split his lip, tasted blood, and kept moving. He needed to get upstairs, needed to reach the main office, needed to find those real bank records before Caldwell could destroy them. Creed blocked his path, gun drawn and aimed. End of the line, Vale. Ronan dove left as the gun fired, felt the bullet pass close enough to burn. He rolled, came up with the rifle, and fired without aiming. The shot went wide, but it made Creed duck, and that second of delay was enough. Ronan hit him low, drove him into the wall, and they went down in a tangle of fury and old grudges. Creed's gun clattered away. Ronan's fist found ribs, once, twice. Creed's knee found Ronan's stomach, driving air from his lungs. They rolled apart, both gasping, both bleeding. "You can't win," Creed wheezed. "Even if you get out of here, Caldwell owns this whole territory. There's nowhere you can run that he won't find you." "Then I'll stop running." Ronan hit him again, harder, and Creed went down and stayed down. Behind him, Samuel had taken down 2 guards. Cooper was grappling with a third. The 4th guard was running, smart enough to know when he was outmatched. "Go," Samuel shouted. "We'll hold them here." Ronan hesitated for half a second, then ran. Up the stairs, through hallways that were starting to fill with confused office workers, toward Caldwell's private suite where the real records had to be. He burst through the door to find Caldwell standing by his desk, calmly feeding papers into a small furnace. "Ah, Mr. Vale," Caldwell said without looking up. "Right on time. I was just disposing of some sensitive materials." Ronan crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed Caldwell by his expensive collar, and slammed him against the wall. "Where are the real records?" Caldwell smiled even with Ronan's hand at his throat. "Burning. As we speak. Everything Chen stole, every copy you made, every piece of evidence that could threaten me, all of it turning to ash." Ronan looked at the furnace, saw papers curling and blackening. He released Caldwell, lunged for the fire, tried to grab what he could. His hands burned, the papers crumbled, and he salvaged maybe 3 pages before the heat drove him back. "Too late," Caldwell said pleasantly, straightening his collar. "It's all too late. And now you've assaulted me in my own office, in front of witnesses. That's a crime I can actually prosecute." Guards were flooding into the room now, guns drawn, surrounding Ronan from every angle. He looked at the 3 charred pages in his hands, barely legible, probably useless, and felt the full weight of failure crushing down on him. They'd lost. Everything they'd fought for, every risk they'd taken, every hope they'd kindled, lost in the time it took for papers to burn. Caldwell nodded to his guards. "Take him, and this time make sure he doesn't escape." Rough hands grabbed Ronan, dragged him from the office. He didn't fight. What was the point? The evidence was gone. The witnesses would be intimidated into silence, and Vasquez's legal case would collapse without the documents to support it. As they dragged him back toward the cells, past windows that showed Black Hollow waking to another day of quiet oppression, Ronan caught sight of something that made his heart stop. Dr. Hart, standing across the street with a crowd of people. At least 30 of them. Farmers from San Royale, workers from Black Hollow, faces he recognized from the small meetings they'd held, and every single one of them was carrying papers. Not the bank records, those were gone, but testimonies, contracts, letters. Every piece of documentation they'd collected over the past weeks, held up like shields, like weapons, like proof that they existed and their stories mattered. Hart saw him through the window and nodded once, a small gesture that said, "We're not done yet." The guards threw Ronan back into the cell, and this time they posted 4 men outside to make sure he stayed there. But as he sat on the cold floor with burned hands and a split lip, something like hope began to kindle in his chest. Because Caldwell had miscalculated. He thought this was about documents and evidence and legal technicalities. But it had never been just about that. It was about people deciding they'd had enough, about communities remembering they were stronger together than Caldwell was alone. The empire was cracking, and sometimes all you needed was one good crack to bring the whole thing down. The cell stayed cold through the morning, and Ronan's burned hands throbbed with every heartbeat. Samuel sat against the opposite wall, one eye swollen shut from the fight. Cooper was worse off, nursing cracked ribs and breathing shallow. But they were alive, and that counted for something. The guards outside rotated every 2 hours, professional and silent. No more mistakes. No more opportunities. Noon came and went. Then afternoon. Ronan tracked time by the light through the high window, watching shadows crawl across the floor like they had nowhere better to be. "They're going to kill us," Cooper said finally, his voice tight with pain. "Maybe not," Samuel offered, though he didn't sound convinced. "They are," Ronan said quietly. "But not yet. Caldwell wants us to see the evictions first, wants us to watch everything we fought for collapse. Then he'll make us disappear." Cheerful. Honest. The boots on the stairs came at dusk. 6 guards this time, led by a man Ronan didn't recognize. Older, scarred, with the dead eyes of someone who'd done terrible things so often they'd stopped registering. "You're wanted upstairs," the man said. His voice had the flat effect of a pronouncement, not an invitation. They were marched up through the building to Caldwell's office, where the man himself waited behind his massive desk like a king on a throne. The room had been rearranged, chairs positioned facing large windows that overlooked Black Hollow's main street. "Sit," Caldwell commanded, and they sat because guns encouraged compliance. Outside, the street was filling with people. Ronan recognized faces from San Royale Valley, whole families, their possessions loaded on wagons, standing in confused clusters while Caldwell's men directed them like cattle. There had to be 60 people down there, maybe more. Every family the foreclosures had destroyed. "I wanted you to see this," Caldwell said, moving to stand by the window. "Wanted you to understand the scope of your failure." He gestured at the crowd below. "Every one of those people put their faith in you, believed you could save them. And where are they now? Homeless, destitute, about to be shipped out of the territory with nothing but what they can carry." Ronan watched a little girl clutching a rag doll, crying while her mother tried to comfort her. Watched an old man sitting on a trunk that probably held everything he owned in the world. Watched hope dying in real time on the street below. "The hearing is tomorrow," Caldwell continued. "But it's purely academic now. Judge Morrison has reviewed the preliminary evidence, or rather, the lack thereof, and he's already indicated he'll rule in my favor. Your lawyer put up a good fight, I'll grant her that. But without the bank records, without concrete proof of fraud, she's got nothing but emotional appeals, and emotions don't override contracts." "Those contracts were lies," Ronan said. "Those contracts were business. The families signed them. The terms were clear. If they couldn't meet their obligations, that's unfortunate but not actionable." Caldwell returned to his desk, sat, and steepled his fingers. "You wanted to be a hero, Mr. Vale. Wanted to ride in and save the downtrodden from the big bad villain. It's a nice story. Shame it doesn't reflect how the world actually works." "The world works however people decide it works," Ronan said. "You built this empire by making people believe they were powerless, but belief can change." Caldwell laughed. "Can it? Because I'm looking at those people down there, and they look pretty convinced that I hold all the cards." A knock at the door interrupted them. One of Caldwell's clerks entered, nervous and sweating. "Sir, there's a situation developing." "What kind of situation?" "More people, sir, coming from the south. A lot of them." Caldwell's expression darkened. He moved to the window and Ronan followed his gaze. Coming up the main street was a crowd that made the families from San Royale look small. Hundreds of people, workers from mines and ranches and farms across 3 territories, all walking together with the kind of purpose that said they'd made a collective decision and were seeing it through. At the front walked Dr. Hart, flanked by Eleanor Vasquez and a woman Ronan assumed was Rose, the schoolteacher. Behind them came Samuel's friends from the Silver Dollar, Martha, and the other boarding house keepers, Cooper's fellow miners. And behind them, stretching back so far Ronan couldn't see the end, were ordinary people who'd apparently decided that ordinary wasn't enough anymore. "What is this?" Caldwell demanded, turning to his clerk. "They're saying they're here to testify, sir, all of them. They're demanding the hearing be moved to accommodate the crowd." Vasquez's voice carried up from the street, amplified somehow. "Marcus Caldwell. Under territorial law, when more than 50 citizens petition for public testimony in a matter of land rights, you are required to provide appropriate venue and time." Caldwell's face went red. "She can't." "She can, sir," the clerk said miserably. "The statute is clear, and she's got more than 50. She's got hundreds. Then we'll hold the hearing in the biggest building we have, and they'll all get their 2 minutes of worthless testimony before Morrison rules in my favor anyway. But the clerk was shaking his head. Sir, Morrison sent word. He's recusing himself from the case. The silence that followed was absolute. What? Caldwell's voice had lost all its smoothness. He said given the public attention and the scale of testimony being offered, he doesn't feel he can provide an impartial judgment. He's requested a circuit judge from the territorial capital. Ronan felt something shift in the air. Caldwell had owned Morrison. That much had been clear. But a circuit judge from outside? Someone without local connections? Without debts owed to Caldwell's influence? That was a different game entirely. Caldwell gripped his desk so hard his knuckles went white. Who? Judge Sarah Brennan, sir. She arrives on tonight's train. The name meant nothing to Ronan, but Caldwell's reaction said everything. The older man actually swayed, like he'd taken a physical blow. No, Caldwell said. Not her. Anyone but her. You know her? Ronan asked. Caldwell didn't answer. He was staring out the window at the crowd below, and for the first time since Ronan had met him, the man looked genuinely afraid. The clerk cleared his throat. Sir, there's one more thing. The newspapers. What about them? They're here. All of them. Denver Post, Santa Fe Register, even the San Francisco Chronicle. They heard about the testimony and they want to cover it. Caldwell turned on the clerk with such fury that the young man actually took a step back. How? How did they hear about it? I believe Dr. Hart sent telegrams, sir, to every major newspaper within 500 miles. Hart, Ronan thought with something like admiration. She'd been busy while he was locked in a cell. Caldwell dismissed the clerk with a wave that was almost violent. When they were alone again, as alone as you could be with 6 armed guards present, he turned to Ronan with an expression that was pure poison. This changes nothing. You understand that? Even if Brennan hears the case, even if every single one of those people testifies, I've still got the contracts, I've still got the law on my side, and I've still got enough money to appeal any unfavorable ruling until they're all dead of old age. Maybe, Ronan said, but you're scared. I can see it. Something about Judge Brennan has you rattled, and I'm guessing it's because she's one person you can't buy or threaten. Everyone can be bought or threatened, it's just a matter of finding the right price or the right pressure point. You keep telling yourself that. Caldwell's hand moved toward a desk drawer, and the guard's guns came up immediately. He froze, then slowly withdrew his hand, empty. I want you to watch tomorrow, Caldwell said quietly, when Brennan rules in my favor despite all this theater. When those people realize their testimonies meant nothing, when your little revolution collapses under the weight of legal reality, I want you to see it, understand it, and carry that understanding to your grave. And if she rules against you, she won't. But if she does? Caldwell smiled, and it was the kind of smile that promised violence. Then I'll burn this entire territory to the ground before I let a mob of ungrateful peasants take what's mine. They were marched back to the cell, but something had changed. The guards were nervous now, talking in low voices about the crowd outside, about what it meant, about whether they were on the right side of what was coming. That night, Ronan barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that little girl with the rag doll, saw the old man on his trunk, saw all the ways this could still go wrong. Brennan might be honest, but honest didn't mean sympathetic. She could rule by pure letter of law, and the law, as written, favored contracts over compassion. Dawn came gray and cold. The guards brought water and stale bread, the minimum required to keep prisoners alive. Ronan forced himself to eat despite his burned hands, despite his stomach churning with anxiety. At 8 o'clock, they were brought upstairs again, but not to Caldwell's office, to the street, where the crowd had swelled to what looked like 1,000 people. The hearing had been moved to an outdoor platform hastily constructed in the town square, because no building in Black Hollow could hold this many witnesses. Judge Sarah Brennan sat at a table on the platform, reviewing documents with the focused intensity of someone who took her job seriously. She was younger than Ronan expected, maybe 45, with steel gray hair and a face that looked like it had never wasted time on nonsense. Eleanor Vasquez sat at one end of the platform, her cases of legal documents stacked beside her. At the other end sat 3 lawyers Ronan didn't recognize, all in expensive suits, all radiating the smug confidence of men who'd never lost a case that mattered. Caldwell's legal team. Ronan and the others were positioned to the side, under guard but visible to the crowd. He searched the faces until he found Dr. Hart, standing with Rose and a group of San Royale families. She caught his eye and nodded, a small gesture that said, "Everything's ready." Ready for what? He didn't know. But he trusted her. Judge Brennan struck her gavel, and the crowd quieted like someone had thrown a switch. "This court is now in session," she announced, her voice carrying across the square without needing amplification. "We're here to review a petition filed by Eleanor Vasquez on behalf of 63 families from San Royale Valley, challenging the foreclosure proceedings initiated by Caldwell Holdings. Ms. Vasquez, you may present your opening argument." Vasquez stood, and Ronan saw the careful control in her movements. This was her arena, her battlefield, and she knew every inch of it. "Your Honor, the foreclosures in question were not legitimate business transactions. They were systematic fraud, designed and executed to strip families of land they'd worked for generations. My clients were sold loans with predatory terms that were deliberately designed to fail. When they did fail, Caldwell Holdings purchased those debts from banks Mr. Caldwell himself controls, then foreclosed at a fraction of fair value." She pulled out a document. "I have testimony from 12 families documenting this pattern." One of Caldwell's lawyers stood, a silver-haired man who moved like an expensive weapon. "Your Honor, business transactions are not fraud simply because one party regrets the terms. These families signed contracts voluntarily. If they couldn't meet their obligations, that's unfortunate, but not actionable." "Ms. Vasquez," Judge Brennan said, "do you have evidence of actual fraud, misrepresentation, coercion, anything that would invalidate these contracts?" This was the moment. The moment where Vasquez would have to admit the bank records were gone, where the case would collapse for lack of proof. But Vasquez smiled. "Your Honor, I'd like to call David Chen to testify." The crowd murmured. Caldwell leaned forward in his seat, confusion crossing his face. "David Chen is dead," one of Caldwell's lawyers objected. "Killed in a stage robbery 2 weeks ago." "That's what you were supposed to think," Vasquez said. "But Mr. Chen is very much alive, and he's here to testify." A path opened in the crowd, and David Chen walked through it. He looked different, beard grown out, clothing changed, moving with the careful steps of someone who'd spent 2 weeks hiding. But it was definitely him, alive, breathing, carrying another leather folder. Caldwell stood so fast his chair fell backward. "That's impossible. I saw the body." "You saw a body," Vasquez corrected. "Dr. Hart can explain the details of how we faked Chen's death, but the short version is we needed you to think your leak was sealed, needed you to get comfortable, needed you to stop looking for him." Chen climbed onto the platform and was sworn in. His hands shook as he raised them, but his voice was steady. "State your name and occupation for the record," Judge Brennan said. "David Chen. I was a senior clerk in Caldwell Holdings' land office for 2 years." "And what brings you here today?" Chen opened his folder. "I have the original internal bank records showing how Caldwell Holdings systematically manipulated loan terms. I have correspondence between Mr. Caldwell and his bank managers coordinating interest rate increases that were falsely attributed to market conditions. And I have the actual Continental Cattle Corporation contract showing that Mr. Caldwell promised delivery of San Royale land before he'd even completed the foreclosures, proving premeditation." He laid the documents on Judge Brennan's table. She examined them in silence, her expression unreadable. "These weren't in the preliminary evidence filing," Caldwell's lawyer said. "We object to their introduction." "Overruled," Brennan said without looking up. "If you're suggesting these documents were unavailable at the time of filing, Mr. Chen's presence here suggests otherwise. If you'd like to cross-examine regarding their authenticity, you'll have that opportunity." She kept reading. The crowd stayed silent. Ronan barely breathed. Finally, Brennan looked up. "These appear to show systematic fraud. Interest rates varying by as much as 20% from stated terms, loan conditions changed after signing without borrower notification, and coordination with foreclosure buyers prior to default." She fixed Caldwell with a look that could have cut glass. "Mr. Caldwell, would you like to address these allegations?" Caldwell stood, and for a moment Ronan thought he might actually try to defend himself. But the man's face had gone from confident to calculating, and when he spoke, his voice carried the cold precision of someone who'd found a new angle. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a recess to review these documents with my legal team." As you noted, we've had no opportunity to verify their authenticity or prepare a response. Request granted. 1 hour. The gavel struck, and Caldwell moved quickly off the platform, surrounded by his lawyers, heading back toward his office building. Ronan watched them go and felt the guards around him tense. "Something's wrong," Samuel muttered. "Yeah." Dr. Hart pushed through the crowd to reach them. "Chen's alive," she said, and there was fierce pride in her voice. "We hid him in the mines outside town. Caldwell's men never thought to look there." "How did you fake his death?" Ronan asked. "Borrowed a body from the territorial morgue, dressed it in Chen's clothes, staged a robbery scene. It only had to hold up long enough for Caldwell to stop hunting." She glanced toward the office building where Caldwell had disappeared. "But he knows now, which means Chen's in danger again." "We all are," Ronan said. "Caldwell's not going to just accept defeat. He's planning something." The hour passed slowly. People in the crowd talked in nervous whispers, sensing that the real confrontation was still coming. Judge Brennan reviewed Chen's documents again, making notes in tight, precise handwriting. When Caldwell returned, he'd changed. Not his clothes, those were still immaculate, but his demeanor. The fear was gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. "Your Honor," he began, "after reviewing Mr. Chen's documents, I must inform the court that they are forgeries. Skillful forgeries, I'll grant, but forgeries nonetheless." "That's a lie," Chen shouted from the crowd. Brennan struck her gavel. "Order. Mr. Caldwell, that's a serious allegation. Can you support it?" "I can." The signatures on several of these documents are inconsistent with known samples. The dates don't align with corporate records, and most tellingly, the paper stock used didn't exist during the periods these documents supposedly cover. He gestured to one of his lawyers, who produced a thick folder. "We have expert analysis prepared by a forensic document examiner." Vasquez was on her feet immediately. "Your Honor, this is a transparent delay tactic. We've had these documents authenticated by—" "By whom?" Caldwell interrupted. "By Dr. Hart, who just admitted to staging a fake death. By Mr. Chen, who has every reason to fabricate evidence against his former employer. This entire case is built on lies and emotional manipulation." The crowd began to turn ugly. Shouts erupted. Someone threw something at the platform. Judge Brennan's gavel came down like thunder. "Order. I will clear this square if necessary." She waited for silence. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm ordering these documents submitted to an independent examiner. We'll reconvene in 3 days for—" "There won't be 3 days," Caldwell said quietly. Everyone froze. "Excuse me?" Brennan's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. "I said there won't be 3 days because I'm withdrawing the foreclosures. All of them. Effective immediately." The square erupted in confused noise. Ronan stared at Caldwell, trying to understand what game he was playing. "Furthermore," Caldwell continued, raising his voice to be heard, "I'm dissolving Caldwell Holdings and transferring all assets to a trust that will distribute them equitably among the families affected by my business practices over the past 20 years. Complete chaos. People screaming questions, crying, grabbing each other in disbelief. The guards around Ronan lowered their weapons, looking as confused as everyone else. Brennan struck her gavel repeatedly. "Mr. Caldwell, are you aware of what you're saying?" "Perfectly aware, Your Honor. I'm saying this fight is over." "They won." He looked directly at Ronan. "You won. Congratulations." "I don't believe you," Ronan said. Caldwell smiled. "Smart. You shouldn't, because there's a cost." "What cost?" "The Continental Cattle Corporation deal is dead. Without those land transfers, they're pulling out, which means the investment capital they were bringing to this territory, the jobs, the infrastructure, the economic growth, all of that disappears." He addressed the crowd now. "You wanted to save your farms? Congratulations, you'll keep them, and you'll watch this entire territory slide into poverty because the only industry with enough money to sustain it just walked away." "That's not—" Vasquez started, but Caldwell cut her off. "It's exactly what will happen. I controlled 90% of the commerce in 3 territories. I owned the banks, the mines, the transportation networks. Without me, without my capital and my deals, this region has nothing. Within a year, half of you will be begging me to buy your land just so you can afford to eat." The crowd's jubilation died. People looked at each other uncertainly, the weight of Caldwell's words sinking in. "He's bluffing," Dr. Hart said, but she didn't sound certain. "Am I?" Caldwell pulled out a document, handed it to Judge Brennan. "Here's the official dissolution paperwork. You'll find everything in order. I'm done fighting. I'm leaving Black Hollow, leaving this territory, and I'm taking my money with me. Good luck surviving without it." He turned and walked away, his lawyers scrambling to follow. The guards around Ronan looked at each other, then simply left. No orders, no purpose, just men abandoning a sinking ship. Ronan stood there, trying to process what had just happened. They'd won. Caldwell had surrendered. The families would keep their land. So why did it feel like defeat? Judge Brennan examined the dissolution papers, her face unreadable. Finally, she looked up. "These appear to be legitimate. Pending verification, I'm ruling in favor of the petitioners. The foreclosures are void, the land returns to original ownership, and Caldwell Holdings is dissolved." She struck her gavel. Court adjourned. The crowd erupted again, this time in genuine celebration. People were hugging, crying, lifting their children onto their shoulders. Someone started singing, others joined in. But Ronan couldn't join them. He pushed through the crowd until he found Vasquez, who was packing up her documents with an expression that matched his own. "He's planning something," Ronan said. "Obviously." "Do you know what?" She shook her head. "But men like Caldwell don't surrender. They retreat, they regroup, and they come back harder." Dr. Hart appeared beside them. "We need to secure the land office records before Caldwell's people destroy them. If we're going to actually transfer ownership back to the families, we need those deeds." "I'll go," Ronan said. "Not alone you won't," Hart replied. "Samuel Cooper, gather anyone who's not celebrating. We need bodies." Within 10 minutes, they had a group of 20, all armed with the rifles from Caldwell's stolen armory. They marched to the land office building, expecting resistance. They found none. The building was empty. Not just evacuated, stripped. Filing cabinets stood open and bare. Desk drawers had been emptied. Even the maps on the walls had been torn down. "He took everything," Samuel said, stunned. "Every record, every deed, every proof of ownership." "Which means the families can't prove the land was theirs," Hart said quietly. "Caldwell surrendered the foreclosures, but without the original deeds." "The land belongs to no one," Vasquez finished. "Which means it becomes territorial property, which means it can be bought, which means Caldwell or someone like him can swoop in and purchase it legally," Ronan said. "He didn't surrender, he just changed tactics." The realization settled over them like a shroud. Caldwell had played them, made them think they'd won while setting up a situation where he could take everything anyway, this time with legal cover that not even Judge Brennan could challenge. "There has to be copies," Cooper said desperately. "Somewhere. The territorial office, the banks, somewhere." "Caldwell owned the banks," Vasquez reminded him, "and territorial records take months to access through official channels. By then, he'll have purchased everything through shell companies, and we'll be right back where we started." Ronan felt the defeat trying to pull him under. They'd fought so hard, risked so much, and Caldwell had still won. Not through force or intimidation, but through the kind of legal maneuvering that was impossible to fight because it was technically legitimate. "Wait!" Chen's voice cut through the despair. He'd followed them to the land office, was standing in the doorway looking at the empty cabinets. "Caldwell didn't take everything." "What do you mean?" "I mean I made copies. Not just of the bank records, of everything, every deed, every title, every property record in this building." He smiled weakly. "It's what clerks do. We copy things. And I copied everything to a secondary file system that Caldwell didn't know existed." "Where?" Vasquez demanded. "County Records Building. 3 blocks south. Caldwell never went there because he thought it was just tax documents and historical archives, but I filed copies of every land office transaction there for the past 2 years, hidden in the property tax records under false names." They ran. The County Records Building was older and shabbier than Caldwell's office, but when they burst through the doors, they found the filing system intact. Chen led them to a back room where dusty cabinets held the bones of Black Hollow's bureaucratic history. "Here," he said, pulling open a drawer. "And here. And these 3 drawers over there." The deeds were all there, every single one, filed under names like Smith John and Jones Mary, generic enough that no one would look twice, but organized well enough that someone who knew the system could find them. "This is it," Vasquez said, her hands shaking as she pulled out document after document. "This is everything we need. With these originals, we can file immediate ownership claims for every family. Caldwell can't buy land that's already legally owned." "Will it hold up?" Hart asked. "It's original documentation filed with an official territorial office. It absolutely holds up." Vasquez looked at Chen with something like awe. "You saved them. All of them." Chen sat down heavily on the floor, looking like someone who'd been holding his breath for weeks and could finally exhale. "I couldn't save myself, but I could save this." They worked through the night, cataloging documents, preparing ownership claims, building the legal framework that would protect the San Royale families from any future attempts at seizure. By dawn, Vasquez had filed preliminary claims with Judge Brennan for all 63 families. By noon, those claims had been approved. By evening, riders were heading to San Royale Valley with documents proving ownership, protecting them from Caldwell or anyone else who thought they could sweep in and buy what wasn't for sale. The victory should have felt sweet. But Ronan couldn't shake the sense that something was still wrong. He found Caldwell 2 days later in his mansion on the hill overlooking Black Hollow. The place was being packed up, expensive furniture wrapped and loaded onto wagons. The man himself stood on the balcony, watching his empire being dismantled one crate at a time. "Come to gloat?" Caldwell asked without turning. "Come to understand." "Understand what?" "Why you're really leaving, because I don't buy that you're just walking away." Caldwell laughed, and there was genuine amusement in it. "You're right, I'm not. I'm 63 years old, Mr. Vale. I've spent 40 years building this empire, and you tore it down in a month. That takes something. Vision, maybe? Commitment? The kind of stubbornness that doesn't quit even when quitting is the smart move. So I'm tired. Tired of fighting small battles over small pieces of land with small people who can't see the bigger picture." He finally turned to face Ronan. "I'm going to San Francisco. There's a new industry there. Electricity, telephony, things that make railroads and cattle look primitive. And I'm going to build another empire, bigger than this one, using everything I learned here." "Including how to exploit people?"